this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
When someone you love is facing cancer, you want to do more than send a card or flowers that will wilt in a week. You want to actually help. That's where the Balm Box comes in. Our care packages are built from research with over 500 cancer patients and caregivers, packed with items people actually use during treatment. Think soothing, practical, thank goodness I have this kind of relief. For you, it's not just a gift. It's a way to show up in a moment where words fall short. For them, it's comfort, calm, and a reminder they're not alone. From chemo-friendly boxes to mastectomy recovery kits, even options for men, we've made it simple to give something that's elegant, premium, and genuinely useful. And yes, domestic shipping's always free on orders over $50, because making someone feel cared for shouldn't be complicated. So skip the empty get well soon. Send real help, real comfort, and maybe even a laugh. Visit thebalmbox.com. That's TheBalmBox.com. Balm, like healing and care. The Balm Box, because cancer patients don't need bouquets and brownies. They need balm.
Then she says, have you seen a photo of my son? And I'm like, who is this person?
Welcome to the Boys and Girls Podcast. Arranged marriage is basically a reality show, and you're auditioning for your soulmate. And who's judging? Only your entire family? I sacrificed myself to this ancient tradition, hoping to find love the right way. And instead, I found chaos, comedy, and a lot of cringe. Listen to Boys and Girls on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I actually drop better when I'm high. It heightens my senses, calms me down. If anything, I'm more careful. Honestly, it just helps me focus.
That's probably what the driver who killed a 4-year-old told himself. And now he's in prison. You see, no matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hey everyone, it's Emily Simpson and Shane Simpson from the Legally Brunette podcast.
Each week, we're bringing you true crime through a legal lens.
Whether you want all the facts on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, or you still need to wrap your head around the Diddy verdict, we're breaking it all down step by step.
And we're not just lawyers, we're also husband and wife. It makes for some pretty entertaining episodes.
Listen to Legally Brunette on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl. He thought up Willy Wonka and the BFG. But did you know he was a spy? In the new podcast, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, I'll tell you that story and much, much more.
What?
You probably won't believe it either.
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Cool Zone Media.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions.
Welcome to It Could Happen Here. I'm Garrison Davis. I'm joined by Mia Wong. It's the start of a new week, so let's start preparing for what these next few months are going to look like in the wake of Trump's election victory last week. So one thing I was thinking about after the results kind of rolled in, and seeing everyone's reactions online, you have a mix of people going full doomer, some people trying to get hopped up on hopium, some people on copium, right? Just trying to find any psychological way to survive. And for me, kind of the way I like to survive is just through information. So this episode, we're going to get into how we see life for trans people under a second Trump term, based on both what he's done in the past, what he's promised to do in the future. And I know in the days after the election, LGBTQ, crisis hotlines all saw a massive spike in people calling in, to the point where some people just were even unable to reach someone. And I understand this is a very scary moment in time. And as much as it might not be fun to hear about how things are all going to get worse, there's also some misconceptions. And I think there's also a degree of power in actually being able to reasonably ascertain what things could look like instead of just kind of feeling it out and just going purely on vibes. So to kind of start, I guess I'll mention some things that Trump did in his first term that then got undone by Biden, which will probably just end up being reinstated. We don't know these for sure, but that's like a decent guess. So one of the first things Trump did when he got into office is he rolled back an Obama-era memo directing schools to protect trans students from discrimination.
Yeah, and that, by the way, discrimination protection is a constant theme in this episode. It's going to get a lot worse.
Trump later went on to ban trans people from serving in the military. He also went after trans prisoners, making it so that trans people usually would need to be housed in prisons and jails according to their assigned sex at birth, which is, of course, a very dangerous situation for people incarcerated, specifically trans women.
Yeah, and I think there is good reason to expect that treatment there is going to get worse. There's been, we'll get into this more later in the episode, but there's been a real focus on incarcerated trans people getting health care.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that's kind of ambiguous as to how Trump could go about trying to stop these people from getting health care. So the thing about providing health care to trans people who have been incarcerated is that they have to do it. It is something that is required by the Constitution of the United States. The Eighth Amendment holds that there is a ban on cruel and unusual punishment, and withholding medical care is so obviously a form of cruel and unusual punishment that even staggeringly right-wing Supreme Courts have been like, no, you actually have to give people medical care in prison. So this is one that's going to be a little bit difficult for him to do. I don't know. He might find some way to do it. This is one of the ones where there's a real potential for it to get worse. And we simply do not know enough about what the legal strategy is going to be here to say for sure. But
it's also worth mentioning, like, people have had to fight for access to healthcare in prison. Like, it's not something that comes easily. Like, people have had to sue to make sure that they get the healthcare that they are legally required to receive. And we can just assume that process will probably be slightly more difficult under a second Trump term, like it was under a first Trump term, than it may kind of currently be now. So that's kind of one shift in how things might be slightly more challenging.
Yeah, and I want to also mention, so that analysis, and a lot of the analysis, the policy analysis that I'm going to be doing going forward is heavily indebted to trans policy expert Corinne Green, who we've had on the show a couple of times before. Amazingly, she was one of the people who ended up working on compliance for that lawsuit where Kamala Harris tried to keep trans prisoners from getting healthcare. And she came in and had to ensure that the state of California was doing it, and they weren't. So that's something that has been fought for. And that's something, the trans community is small enough that is the thing that has specifically been fought for by people who I consulted to make this episode. So yeah, these rights have been dearly won, and it's going to be very hard to protect them. If I'm doing something where there's something about policy implementation, assume that I talked to Corinne about this, and that's why it's accurate. And while I'm doing this, I want to plug a couple of the projects that she works on. But there's something you can do very immediately right now before we get into all of the terrible stuff that's going to happen, which is you can donate to the Trans Income Project, which is a project that supports trans people and trans sex workers in particular, which is a lot of trans people, and supports them by just giving them direct cash transfers. They do some other work too. But yeah, and direct cash transfers are one of the most effective ways that you can help trans people. And if you give money to this organization, there'll be links in the chat. You can help do this. So let's get into how things are going to get worse. Unfortunately, Trump administration, Congress, and state legislatures have an enormous amount of power to make everything worse. We're mostly going to be focusing on what Trump and Congress can do. Well, we'll get into the legislators a bit at the end. So there are a lot of levers of state power and sort of policy techniques that Trump can pull here to make things worse. We're going to go roughly from easiest to hardest to pull off. So the first lever is federal funding. Probably the easiest place that this lever can get pulled is in the education system. Trump can, unfortunately, fairly easily implement what amounts to a Don't Say Trans ban on a federal level by threatening to withhold federal funding for any school that doesn't mandate things like misgendering and dead naming students, and this is something he's explicitly talked about, is banning anyone in classes, any teachers, from talking about transitioning at all. He's also, threatened to have teachers who talk to students about being trans, investigated by the Department of Justice. We'll get more into Department of Justice investigations in a bit. He's also used an explicit threat the same threat of cutting state funding to stop schools from letting kids use the right bathroom in the locker room. It's also possible he will do that through Title IX, but there's a lot of ways that he can do this very easily that are probably not going to be able to be stopped, and this is going to get extremely bad very quickly. Another sort of avenue that he has is, I guess, what you'd call like the Hyde Amendment for trans people. So for people who don't know what the Hyde Amendment is, the Hyde Amendment is a rider that bans federal spending on abortion. It's been like modified. It's not like the 100% ban that it used to be, because now there's like exceptions for rape and incest and stuff, life of the parents too. But it is a very, very effective Republican tool. It's actually also Joe Biden helped implement that. That's been used to limit access to abortion. And we already have seen the start of these kind of things, even under Biden. There was a version of this, of a kind of Hyde Amendment for trans healthcare that was an attempt to get the DoD to not be able to spend money on trans healthcare. That's already a provision that's been tacked on to like one of the most recent spending bills that went through because Joe Manchin like defected and joined the Republicans to get it onto one of the spending omnibuses. And that was, again, just for the Department of Defense. We are very likely to see versions of these attached to every single spending bill that explicitly say that government funding cannot be used for trans healthcare. It will definitely be used to say you can't use it for trans healthcare for minors. It is possible this will be expanded to adults. We don't know. It depends how far their sort of anti-trans, derangement goes. But that is a real danger. And this can also be expanded to refusing to allow Medicare and Medicaid to pay for anything at a clinic that does trans healthcare, even if the money isn't funding the healthcare. That's also possible. That would be absolutely catastrophic for the medical system. Even just a government ban that, prevents things like Medicare and Medicaid and like government healthcare from covering transition in the first place is a disaster. But if they go further and, prevent clinics who like provide trans healthcare from taking Medicare and Medicaid, that's bad enough that I think that is, in terms of what is the thing we most need to be worried about right now, I think that's the worst possible thing that can happen very quickly.
Because it could basically pressure medical clinics into refusing to offer any kind of gender-affirming care, because it would threaten their just base ability to operate as a medical clinic, taking Medicare, Medicaid, etc.
Yeah, this is something I talked about a bit in our Agenda 47 episode on this. But this effectively creates like Sophie's choice for these clinics, because it's either you treat trans people who have private insurance, right, or you can treat like people who are on Medicare and Medicaid. So it's like, okay, either you let trans people get fucked, or you let like every poor person or old person in the US like eat shit. So there aren't good options here for that.
How do we think something like this would be implemented? Like, is this an executive order, or does this have to go through Congress?
So that's the other part about this that's very bad. The way this is being done is these things are attached as what are called riders to spending bills. So any spending bill the Republicans put in front of the House, they will have this like provision in it, right? And the really big problem for us is that spending bills usually get passed now out of this thing called Senate reconciliation. And the thing about Senate reconciliation is that you can't filibuster them. So these can just get rammed through really, really quickly. And there's not going to be enough opposition in the House to stop it either. So, I mean, some of this stuff probably could be done with executive orders, but it's quite possible you won't even need that because it can just be rammed through in spending bills.
Which is a little bit harder to undo, from my understanding.
Yeah. Executive orders can be overturned by the next guy, whereas getting these provisions out is going to take a long time.
Yeah.
This is another issue that we have. The map for the Democrats retaking the Senate is terrible in 2026, and it's bad in 2028 too. So I still don't think, this is being recorded Friday, I don't think we still actually know what their majority in the Senate is going to be, but it's a lot. And also we know that Joe Manchin is willing to vote for stuff like this because he's done it already. So this is probably coming quickly. It basically depends on how good their policy people are, which who knows. But yeah, this is not going to be difficult for them to implement, and it's going to be extremely damaging.
Well, that was a lot. Let's take a little bit of a break. And when we come back, take another look into what life could be like under a second Trump term.
We are back. So the threat to trans people does not only come from Congress and the president. One of the things that's almost certainly going to happen very soon is there is currently a case about a trans healthcare ban for minors in Tennessee in front of the Supreme Court. It's called Scrimetti versus U.S. We are almost certainly going to lose this. Not losing this requires a bunch of extremely unlikely things happening. And this is very, very bad. What Scrimetti versus U.S. is probably going to cost us is trans people as a group being protected by the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment is supposed to provide everyone equal protection under the law. The way this has been interpreted is that if you're passing a law that directly targets a group, there's certain levels of scrutiny that have to be applied to it to see whether or not it's discriminatory and can be allowed to proceed. What's probably going to happen here is that trans people aren't going to be held as protected at all, which means that the 14th Amendment will not protect us from things that are unbelievably obviously discriminatory, like trans healthcare bans for youth, which is, again, literally the same procedures that are happening for trans children are done to cis children all the time, and it's fine.
Yeah.
So this is very obviously discrimination. We're probably going to lose it because the Supreme Court is full of a bunch of the worst people in the entire world. It is technically possible that Gorsuch defects and drags someone else over, and we get a thing that says we have intermediate scrutiny. That would be the best win we could possibly get on this. It's unlikely. We're probably going to lose it. And this is also going to overturn the landmark case, Bostock versus Clayton County, which is the one that rules that you can't discriminate against trans people based on their gender identity.
Specifically for employers as well.
Yeah, for employers. This is specifically for employers. So what we could very well be about to lose, and again, this is another thing that's very high likelihood because this case is already in front of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court hates us. We could be about to lose employment discrimination protections. Now, to be fair, and I think most trans people who are listening to the show know this, I don't know how many cis people understand this, but the level of trans employment discrimination in the workplace is unbelievable.
Yeah, this isn't really enforced at all. Yeah. It's pretty bad.
It is something that right now is technically possible to do, and you're not allowed to just straight up say it. But, there is a reason that the unemployment rate for trans people is 3 times as high. No, I think it's about 3 times as high as the rate for cis people, right? We don't have great data. There's some data from the Trans Longitudinal Survey from 2022, but the full report isn't out yet. But what I will say is that the trans level of unemployment right now in the U.S. is very low. The level of unemployment for trans people is 1936 Great Depression levels. And this is before we lose these protections. It is also worth noting this will not overturn state level protections. So if you're in a state that has specifically banned it, you will have some more recourse, but we're losing 14th Amendment protections.
On a federal level, it would basically allow explicit employment discrimination if someone's trans.
It's possible that case goes marginally better for us and that doesn't happen, but it's hard to see how that would happen. The lawyers I talk to will say this is not a legal opinion, but they seem to think that this is how this would go, and the policy people seem to think it'd be going the same way.
Yeah.
There's some other things that can happen. Trump has been promising we're going to get federal investigations into clinics that provide gender-affirming care, also into hospitals. There's going to be enormous legal harassment. This has already been happening on a sort of lower level, but from sort of individual lawsuits and state attorney generals.
Yeah.
But this is going to be happening with the full backing of the Department of Justice.
You can look at what Texas has been doing the past 4 years.
Yeah.
With them investigating not just clinics, but also parents of trans kids.
Yeah, parents, individual healthcare providers. He was also pledging to investigate the companies that make hormones. So that's bad. There's also the Department of Justice has been making some incredibly half-ass attempts to try to go after some of the healthcare bans. That's all going to stop. They're just going to give all that up. There's also a bunch of bills that could be passed depending on the Democrats' willingness to filibuster them. So Trump has called for a ban of trans people playing sports that correspond with their gender, and that may well pass because the Democrats are cowards and the Republicans are going to have a large majority in the Senate.
Yep.
Trump has also pushed for a ban on gender-affirming care for minors, including HRTs, hormone replacement therapy, which is one of the main ways you transition, and puberty blockers. That one is less likely to make it through the Senate, but it also, again, depends on how cowardly the Democrats are and how much they decide to cave. And this is the moment that there is another thing that you can do, and you should start doing this right now, which is this is the moment right now to start pressuring your congressperson about this. like start calling them, start pressuring them, and start making sure that they don't fully sort of turn on trans rights. This is just something that you can concretely do right now, because these people need to understand that there are consequences for turning on trans people, because if there aren't consequences, they're going to do it. Now, Trump has also called for a ban on recognizing trans people at the federal level on like all identification documents, things like that. Also would outlaw non-binary markings on passports and stuff. That would also be really bad. That's also something that probably requires a law. And that's, again, another thing. Call your Congress people. Like, pressure them now. Start doing it now. Do not wait until he's actually in office.
And like all of these issues are things that public opinion has been shifting on greatly the past like 2 years.
Yeah.
These things used to be much more kind of seen as like, yeah, this like makes sense. This is like a humane and reasonable effort to include a group of discriminated people. And now we see in a growing number, a majority of people polled on this issue do not support these measures. They don't support having the ability to have your gender marker match your gender identity. They don't support your ability to participate in public life. And that is the result of an intentional misinformation campaign and essentially like a hate crime campaign and a hate speech campaign that has been going on for the past like 4 years, because Republicans knew that they already lost the battle on like regular gay people. So they moved on to the next subjugated class. And that's something we've talked about for a while. And this is like something that is shifting. So you have to actually verbally express to your representatives that this is something that you actually do care about. Otherwise, they will look at these like general polls and be like, oh, I guess this isn't popular anymore, and shift and cave on it. They need to know that their constituents actually do care about these things if we want these things to not get passed through Congress.
Yeah. And it's also worth mentioning that a lot of this, people just don't know anything about trans people because we're like 1% of the population right now. Part of the reason the Republican campaign is working is that people are susceptible to being told things about trans people and believing them. But that also works for us, right?
It goes both ways.
Part of what's been going on is that like we haven't had the kind of giant advocacy push outside of some trans people, but we have no money, we have no resources, and we need there to actually be large, widespread, and vocal public support, because otherwise all of the stuff that's happening here is going to get even worse. And, you know, and we could get very well the worst case scenario things, which are full bans for adults. That's a thing that they could pass through Congress, but right now they don't have the support for it.
Yeah.
However, as Garrison is going to get to, there are signs that the Democratic Party is deciding to throw us under the bus. Yeah.
Not as steadfast on this issue than what we would probably prefer.
Yeah, and on the state level, I guess the important thing for the state level is that once we lose 14th Amendment protections, it's going to be so much harder for there to be legal challenges to any of this. And this means we're going to see a proliferation of these state level bans on healthcare, even sort of marching ahead of where the federal government is.
Let's have our last break, and when we come back, we will close the episode by discussing Trump's focus on trans issues during his campaign, as well as things that you can start doing like right now to get ready and prepare for these next 4 years. All right, we are back. During the last few months of Trump's campaign, his team shifted away from the key issues of the economy and immigration in their national election ad efforts, and specifically honed in on trans issues as a wedge against Kamala Harris and the Democrats in general. The infamous Kamala is for they, them ad being the prime example of this. According to a PBS report, from October 7th to October 20th, Trump's campaign and pro-Trump groups spent an estimated $39 million on anti-trans ads. And Trump ended up spending more money on these ads than on housing, immigration, and the economy combined. This was his main focus in his final ad push, specifically after the September debate. A new report from journalist Casey Parks, using data from Ad Impact, shows that Republicans spent nearly $215 million on anti-trans ads this election cycle, and this figure does not include cable or streaming ads. This is just network TV. And these anti-trans ads weren't just focused on the presidential election. Other Republicans in various Senate races picked up on the success of these anti-trans ads and used them in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, initially, some thought that maybe this would be a repeat of 2022. Maybe this extra focus on this small group of the population wouldn't lead to kind of electoral successes, pointing to how a similar strategy failed during the 2022 midterms. But then election day came and we saw that there was a degree of success, or at least these did not hurt them in any substantial way, and Republicans won many of these Senate races on anti-trans campaign messages. I'm going to quote from an article in the New York Times called "Trump and the Republicans Bet Big on Anti-Trans Ads Across the Country." Quote, "The Kamala is for they them ad was rated as one of his campaign's more effective in September in some Democratic testing, according to results reviewed by the Times. Republican strategists said the focus on transgender women and girls in sports had been particularly effective with a key group of voters the party had hemorrhaged support from in recent years, college-educated women. One of the things you see in the focus groups is that the moms get really visibly angry on this issue," said Jim McLaughlin, a Republican pollster who works for Mr. Trump and other Republican campaigns. Quote, "It's a fairness issue. They don't want their daughters to lose a scholarship, and they don't want them to get hurt," unquote. The enthusiasm for this issue kind of lines up with what me, Sophie, and Robert saw at the RNC, where anti-trans statements consistently got the loudest applause. Though some state-level Democrats, like Representative Seth Moulton of Massachusetts and Tom Sulzey of New York, as well as some other DNC advisors, have jumped onto the blame game, citing trans issues as, if not the reason, then a reason Democrats just completely fumbled this election, claiming that the Democratic Party is far to the left on trans issues than the average American. But largely, the Dems were not out campaigning for trans people, like loud and proud, this election cycle.
Oh.
Trans issues were intentionally pushed off stage at the DNC, and the Harris campaign tried their hardest to sidestep this issue, giving vague non-answers on whether trans people should be able to receive healthcare by just stating that her administration would, quote-unquote, follow the law, and invoking states' rights type framing. And I see this as just a massive failure to confront an issue that Republicans have, like, slingshotted into the spotlight. And it shows a failure to do things because it's, like, the right thing to do, not just necessarily for some, like, electoral gain.
Well, even on a strategic level, right? We saw this with border policy too, right? Where
Exactly.
the Democrats adopted the Republicans' border policy and then they lost.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, if you just agree or refuse to contest them on their core issues, then that's what people are going to believe, because people have a tendency to believe what their elites are telling them. You can't defeat these people's ideology by just agreeing with it or sidestepping out of the way of it. That just lets it spread.
And I think this is going to be proven to be like the biggest mistake Democrats made this election cycle. Like, you can't just cede territory to the right based on a massive disinformation campaign, which is exactly what the Democrats did on immigration and crime, and they showed a willingness to do that on trans rights. Now, even if some of these people, that Democrats included, claim to not like hate trans people individually, they have allowed questions around access to bathrooms, sports, and government-funded healthcare to be used as a wedge against trans rights as a whole, and the ability for trans people to be able to exist in public life. To close, I think we should have just a brief discussion on what people can do, specifically during these next 75 days, and even in the months after, like what people can do to prepare for some of the worst aspects of this, specifically on the healthcare front. Now, we did a series of episodes a few years ago on DIY HRT. There are both pharmaceutical and home-brewed options for hormones that can be ordered online. Now, since that episode, home-brewed distribution networks have spread throughout the United States. There's probably one already in whatever city is closest to you. Now, access to those networks does require a degree of, like, in-person community, and I know that can be challenging. You can certainly do organizing online on Discord. You can certainly find trans people on Discord that can help you learn where pharmaceutical-grade estrogen can be ordered online. But that type of online organizing will only get more dangerous under a Trump term, especially if the legal status of these hormones change. So I will always emphasize the importance of in-person community, and it might just take, like, learning if there's a trans band in the city you're in, going to some shows, learning where trans people go, where trans people gather. Is there community picnics? Is there book fairs? Is there zine fairs? Like, is there, like, even gaming conventions, right? Just places that there might be a number of trans people gathered, and talk to them about being trans. Talk to them about the issues that you're facing. It might take a few months to, like, gain trust and become friends, but that's just how friendships work anyway. And that can be challenging. And there may not be something like this in a city super close to you, which is why online connections are useful. And sometimes it might require a little bit of travel. Now, what we can do, at least right now, is stockpile things in case things get harder to maintain or produce. There's multiple forms of these hormones that can be stored. And I do believe that there will be some form of home brewed option that will most likely continue to exist even if prescribed hormones get restricted. And a part of why I emphasize kind of doing this in person as well, especially if you're a minor, that will just get more dangerous to do under a second Trump term. I will point people to the website diyhrt.wiki. It's currently the best information source on dosing, testing, how to find supplies, and options for ordering hormones. Now, because changing legal paperwork on the federal or state level often takes a while, if that's something that you want to do, now is the time to start. There's still 70 days until Trump takes office, and some of these changes could start being put into effect. You should absolutely apply for a passport. And now, depending on many variables, it may be advantageous to have your legal name and gender marker match whatever you more easily pass as, rather than your gender identity. Now, I understand why this is less than ideal, and if you think that this might just inhibit your transition progress and push you further back into the closet, especially if the option of changing your gender marker on federal documents just goes away during the next 4 years, then people should just go ahead and get that stuff changed ASAP. But it's something to reflect on and consider. Lastly, I want to mention something about personal safety. Over the course of the past week, I've heard from friends around the country experiencing a spike in anti-queer and misogynistic violence. Chuds, frat boys, and just asshole men have been way more willing to just openly harass queer people out in public. Some of this, I think, is just Trump supporters, quote-unquote, celebrating the election results. But once Trump takes office, I expect this type of harassment to start slowly increasing as chuds feel like they can get away with more just open misogyny, homophobia, racism, etc. I know a lot of people have been talking about or posting about buying firearms. And firearms is one of the last things you should buy in a panic. This is a very careful and calculated choice you need to make about your own personal safety, your own mental health, your own willingness to carry and train with a gun. This is its own topic. But I do recommend buying and carrying pepper gel for basically all queer people and women. It's a great self-defense tool. It spreads less than pepper spray, so you're going to be less likely to just spray yourself. Saber is a good brand. Buy it for yourself. Buy it for your friends. Mia, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah. Two things. One, people have been asking for book recommendations, so we're giving them to you. We're only giving them to you at the end of the episode, so you got to stay around. And I think something that's good to read in this moment on trans issues is Julia Serrano's book, Whipping Girl. I've had Julia Serrano on the show before. She is one of the most important, honestly, feminist theorists of the last, of this century. And there's a new edition of Whipping Girl that's come out recently. And it is one of the fundamental sort of texts to understand the experience of trans femme people in this country and why things have gotten the way that they've gotten. So yeah, go read Whipping Girl. It's spectacular. And then I want to plug one more thing that you can give money to. So, again, another very effective way for cis people to support trans people is give them money, because all of us are unbelievably broke, all of the time. Another place you can give money to is the Trans Justice Funding Project. We'll have that in this too. And they give out grants to other just trans groups who are doing organizing or doing other kinds of sort of support work, mutual aid, et cetera, et cetera. So that's money that just goes directly to trans people. Yeah. And then obviously, as we've said, this is the for cis people part of the episode after our for trans people part. Go call your Congress people, go pressure them, go show up to their offices and make it extremely clear that it is unacceptable to write off trans people and that they need to be willing to successfully stop these writers and successfully do whatever they can to jam up the works to make sure that the Republicans cannot pass bills that will harm us even more than the things that they're already going to do.
When someone you love is facing cancer, you want to do more than send a card or flowers that will wilt in a week. You want to actually help. That's where the Balm Box comes in. Our care packages are built from research with over 500 cancer patients and caregivers, packed with items people actually use during treatment. Think soothing, practical, thank goodness I have this kind of relief. For you, it's not just a gift. It's a way to show up in a moment where words fall short. For them, it's comfort, calm, and a reminder they're not alone. From chemo-friendly boxes to mastectomy recovery kits, even options for men, we've made it simple to give something that's elegant, premium, and genuinely useful. And yes, domestic shipping's always free on orders over $50, because making someone feel cared for shouldn't be complicated. So skip the empty get well soon. Send real help, real comfort, and maybe even a laugh. Visit thebalmbox.com. That's TheBalmBox.com. Balm, like healing and care. The Balm Box, because cancer patients don't need bouquets and brownies. They need balm.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Usually on This Podcast Will Kill You, we talk about the diseases, infections, and biological threats that can make us really sick.
But right now, we're doing something a little different.
We're stepping back and looking at what the human body needs to keep going.
When you consider what we know about sleep in humans, there's one rule that comes out. We are predictably unpredictable sleepers.
We're talking about why sleep works the way it does, why our bodies don't follow neat rules, and why modern life makes rest so hard to come by.
The second half of our series takes us to the digestive system with a multi-part series on what happens after we eat. Okay, I just have to say that all of my favorite words apparently are digestive words.
Sphincter, peristalsis, duodenum. It's fascinating, it's funny, and it matters so much more than you think.
Episodes of our new series run from January 20th through February 17th, with new episodes every Tuesday on the Exactly Right Network.
Listen to This Podcast Will Kill You as part of the Exactly Right Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong with a podcast called The Red Weather.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth.
You can now binge all episodes of The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When you feel uncomfortable, what do you put on?
Biggie.
You put on Biggie when you feel uncomfortable?
Because I want to get confident.
This is DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy, a new podcast from me, a DJ and licensed therapist that asks one simple question. Who do you want to be? And what's the song that can take you there? Music changes what you feel, and what you feel changes what you do, right? That moment where a song shifts something inside you, that's where transformation starts. This year, I'm talking to experts across every area of life, like personal finance icon Gene Chatsky, New York Times journalist David Gellis, relationship legend Dan Savage, human connection teacher Mark Groves, and the man who shaped my ear more than anyone, Questlove. They'll bring the strategies, I'll pair them with the right records, and we'll teach you how to use the music to make change stick. This isn't just a podcast. It's unconventional therapy for your entire year. Listen to DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to It Could Happen Here. I'm Robert Evans, and Along with all of our other correspondents, I'm looking forward to what we can expect from the Trump administration, which is a broad and far-reaching question given the ambitions that Trump and the others who I think will be involved in this new administration have already expressed. And the elevator pitch theme of today's episode is what's going to happen in Gaza once Trump is president again. Will things get better or worse? Obviously, the expectation is worse. I think that's where certainly the safe money goes if you're putting money on this. But the short answer to that question is no one fully knows. Now, the first thing that I did when trying to prepare for this episode was track down as many articles as I could that included interviews with Gazans about their expectations. And those expectations were largely negative, but a little more mixed than you might expect. A Reuters reporter interviewed Abu Osama, living in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. He called Trump's election a, quote, new catastrophe in the history of the Palestinian people, adding, despite the destruction, death, and displacement that we have witnessed, what is coming will be more difficult. It will be politically devastating. This essentially agrees with what a Palestinian from Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip, Ahmed Jarad, told Al Jazeera, quote, Trump and Netanyahu are an evil alliance against the Palestinians, and our fate will be very difficult, not only in the fateful issues, but also in our daily concerns. This is a sad day for Palestinians. Trump will endorse Netanyahu's free hand regarding the possibility of the return of settlements to the Gaza Strip, and even the displacement of large numbers of Palestinians outside it. We hope to return to the north, and now all of our hopes have been shattered. And unfortunately, Jarad's fears here have been immediately proven well-founded. On November 6th, as the rest of the world reeled from Trump's victory, IDF Brigadier General Itzik Cohen told Israeli reporters there is no intention of allowing the residents of the northern Gaza Strip to return to their homes. Humanitarian aid would only be allowed to enter through the south. His justification was that there are no more civilians in the north. Reporting from The Guardian interviewed several international humanitarian law experts, and the members of that likely dying field described Israeli actions here as war crimes. The forcible transfer of civilian populations and the use of food as a weapon are supposed to be banned. Despite this, we can safely assume that there will be no serious consequences as a result of any of this. Now, the timing of this announcement was predominant, and it is not unreasonable to suggest that Israel might not have been as bold as they're currently being if Harris had won. Another Gazan, 70-year-old Dr. Zakia Hilal, told Al Jazeera, it is true that American administrations do not differ in supporting Israel, but some are more severe and more intense than others, like Trump. You can find numerous Gazans expressing feelings along these lines if you read long enough, but you will also find a number who feel like what's coming won't be worse, or at least won't be very different from what they've already endured. Jihad Malaka, a researcher at the Palestinian Planning Center, told Al Jazeera he does not expect Trump's administration to be wildly different from Biden's in this regard. Trump uses rough tools, and Biden and the Democrats resort to soft tools, but the politics are the same. Biden did not make any decision in favor of the Palestinians and was unable to achieve a ceasefire. He did not change the reality of the decisions of his predecessor, Trump, at all. The positions of the two administrations regarding Israel are the same and identical, and they put its interests above all other considerations. You can also find some Gazans who see a sliver of hope in Trump's new administration. Reuters spoke with the owner of a grocery store in Gaza, Khaled D'Souza, who told their reporter, I think Donald Trump, if he wins, he promised the Muslim people in America to stop the war in Gaza. We hope that happens. And it's not necessarily absurd to hope that there may be some positive effects here. Trump has said many horrible things about Palestinians, obviously. Several weeks before the election, he had a phone call with Netanyahu that may have been a violation of the Logan Act, although laws don't really matter anymore. Here's how Slate.com summarized what happened in that call. According to Trump, the Israeli leader said he disregarded President Joe Biden's warning to keep troops out of Rafah in southern Gaza, a decision that resulted in the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in a shootout in the area. Trump also said Netanyahu asked him for advice on how to respond to Iran's missile attack on Israel, to which Trump said he responded, "Do whatever you have to do." Now, That's a dire sign, and it is impossible to imagine that a new Trump regime won't restart the sale and shipment of specific munitions that Biden banned for export to Israel. This July, Biden halted the shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to the IDF because, quote, they cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. Now, the fact that munitions like this will very likely be used is hideous, and I think it's extremely unlikely that we do not see an immediate rise in the death toll. But at the same time, Israel's extant acts have caused great human tragedy and damage. The munitions they have already been responsible for calamitous death and destruction on a fairly wide scale. So where's the cause for any optimism on this at all? It comes from Trump's own self-interest. As Khalid D'Souza noted, Trump ran promising to end wars. This means he does have some vested interest, even if only in his own ego, in forcing Netanyahu to draw things to a close in short order. And there is indeed reporting that Trump has told Netanyahu to wrap things up by January so that he can take office with an end to the conflict and, ideally, use that as a way to kind of bolster his early popularity and gain some political capital for the other sweeping changes he wants to make. Now, the fact that Trump is pushing Netanyahu on ending things in January doesn't mean a sudden peaceful ceasefire. For one thing, nothing is going to happen in the months between then and now to reduce the level of bloodshed. And almost every likely theoretical ends with Israel massively escalating violence and using new, more destructive weapons before bringing an end to their campaign. But it does mean that Trump might be able to pressure Bibi to bring things to an end. There's a good article on this in the BBC. No guarantees Trump will give Netanyahu all he wants. Now, in that piece, Mideast correspondent Lucy Williamson writes, Donald Trump's first term in office was exemplary as far as Israel is concerned, said Michael Oren, a former Israeli ambassador to the United States. The hope is that he'll revisit that, but we have to be very clear-sighted about who Donald Trump is and what he stands for. Firstly, he said, the former president doesn't like wars, seeing them as expensive. Trump has urged Israel to finish the war in Gaza quickly. He's also not a big fan of Israel's settlements in the occupied West Bank, said Ambassador Oren, and has opposed the wishes of some Israeli leaders to annex parts of it. Both of these policies could put him in conflict with far-right parties in Netanyahu's current governing coalition, who have threatened to bring down the government if the prime minister pursues policies they reject. Michael Oren believes Netanyahu will need to take a different approach with the incoming president. If Donald Trump comes to office in January and says, okay, you have a week to finish the war, Netanyahu is going to have to respect that. And we'll continue talking about what this means, but first, here's some ads. So, it is possible that we will see a quick end to the violence in January, and perhaps a quicker one than we would have seen under Harris. That's the best case scenario and not necessarily the likeliest one. And I should re-emphasize here, that best case scenario still means that we will probably see a massive escalation in violence as the IDF seeks to force more people out of northern Gaza, and in the conflict with a large slice of Gaza permanently wrenched from Palestinian control and handed over to Israeli settlers. There is no version of what comes next that is not a calamity to the Palestinian people. Now, the signs from within the Israeli government on what a new Trump administration means for them are certainly bullish, you could say. And reading these tea leaves provides very little fuel for optimism. Itmar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, posted yes with several S's and an emoji of a flexed bicep in a post on social media when the first good returns started coming in for Trump. On the day of the election itself, and a sign of confidence in the coming results, Bibi Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who had been his primary point of contact with the Biden administration, and it's harder to imagine a much more direct sign of what he wants to do than that. Now, I've struggled to present the sweep of possible results of this, and it bears reiterating that the bulk of predictions from Gazans who are plugged into the politics of the region are incredibly negative. Ahmed Fayyad, an independent researcher in Israeli affairs who currently resides in central Gaza, told Al Jazeera that he felt Trump's influence would be entirely negative, adding that Trump was a, quote, more dominating figure than Biden, and his influence would allow Netanyahu to, quote, conquer Gaza. Quote, amidst the weakened Palestinian front and absence of any Arab unity and solidarity, the whole Palestinian cause faces its worst threat yet. Now, what does bear watching is the degree to which Bibi might face threats from his own right flank. Netanyahu himself is almost certainly on the side of doing what will please his patron Trump all the more, and that would be forcing a quick, violent end to the fighting and taking northern Gaza as the spoils of war. But this might bring him into conflict with radicals on his own side, who can't be placated by anything but what they would see as total victory. In the event Netanyahu feels pushed, it is not impossible that he will wind up in conflict with Trump. This has happened before, as Bibi's sense of self-preservation led him to take actions that enraged Trump. The best example of this took place in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 election, if you want to think back to those happier days. Bibi was again the first world leader to call and offer Biden congratulations on his victory, as he was with Trump. This is a habit for the man, who, among other things, is an expert at toadying for favor with U.S. leaders. Trump was livid, and he spoke out about this, telling Israeli journalist Barak Ravid that he believed that he had saved Israel from destruction, and in response, Netanyahu had stabbed him in the back. I'm going to quote now from an article in the BBC. Mr. Trump accused Mr. Netanyahu of congratulating too quickly Mr. Trump's successor, Joe Biden, on winning the 2020 U.S. election. Mr. Trump disputed the election result, though his claims were never upheld. The first person who congratulated Joe Biden was Bibi, the man that I did more for than any other person I dealt with. Bibi could have stayed quiet. He has made a terrible mistake. He was very early, Mr. Trump said, like earlier than most. I haven't spoken to him since. Fuck him. I actually don't know that he said fuck. The actual text of the article says expletive him, but I'm assuming he said fuck him. I think that's probably a fair assumption for me to make. Now, some evidence does suggest that Trump and Bibi don't personally get along, as that quote I just read implies. Certainly not to the degree that Netanyahu and Biden once did. Once, I should say. This may hinge partly on the fact that Trump really only believes in himself and his own benefit, whereas Joe Biden was a strong and committed believer in Israel and was willing to take actions against his own political self-interest in furtherance of that belief. And we've all seen where those actions got him. Just last December, Trump attacked Netanyahu at an early campaign rally in New York, saying Bibi had, quote, let us down by pulling Israeli support for the operation that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani at the last minute. He also criticized the Israeli leader for not being prepared for Hamas's October 7th attack. Now, I want to be clear here that these divisions between both men are blisteringly unlikely to mean anything that approaches relief for the Palestinian people, at least in the near term. The immediate and probably long-term future of Gaza is much bleaker today than it was a few weeks ago. The Guardian recently published an article interviewing former CIA Director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. He predicted Trump would give Bibi a blank check for aggression, which might invite the possibility of open war with Iran. Now, that's the kind of thing that can lead one to panic, especially when you assume a guy like Panetta is privy to a lot of inside information we may not be. But I'm actually not really sure that he is. I don't see any evidence from this article that Panetta is speaking from direct personal knowledge about extant plans to carry out an attack. Instead, he quoted Trump's description of the call that Trump had had with Bibi before the election, telling Netanyahu, do whatever you have to do. So, Leon may just be working from the same information the rest of us have and coming to a somewhat different conclusion. I'm not as sure as he is about an imminent attack on Iran, because Trump campaigned heavily on ending wars. And while I don't credit Trump as a particularly honest man, I do think he sees his personal benefit right now in being able to portray himself as a peacemaker, in part because he has so much domestically he wants to do and so much else internationally he wants to do, right? Expending a bunch of political capital, dealing with the kinds of protests and unrest and even anger from his base that a war with Iran would mean, especially once it gets bogged down in the kind of violence that would come with that. He may not, and likely doesn't, see that as being of benefit to him. Now, that doesn't mean it will never happen. It doesn't mean his calculus won't change. I do foresee some situations in which Trump might decide that his personal benefit is in there being a wider ground conflict with Iran that U.S. forces get drawn into. You know, we'll talk a little bit about some of the possibilities around this. And we're getting outside of the realm of kind of established fact at this point, but I do think it's worth considering some of this. But first, consider these ads. So, when we talk about the possibility of a ground conflict with Iran starting between Israel and Iran, but almost inevitably drawing in more U.S. forces, the known unknowns and unknown knowns in this situation are pretty staggering. If I let myself analyze every possibility, my mind can go to some dark places. Trump sees war with Iran as a negative now, I'm quite sure, but how would he feel about it in the wake of, say, a Musk-centered plan to end the Federal Reserve and tank the dollar, in the wake of the changes that all of his immigration policies would make on the price of food, the Depression-era levels of inflation and unemployment returning to the United States, and the attendant social unrest that would cause? If Americans find themselves on the verge of food riots, perhaps Trump would gamble on war being the best distraction he could manage. It's certainly not impossible. Now, I don't know how useful it is to bury myself in theoreticals and probabilities. The known threats are dire enough, and they demand full-time awareness in order to attempt to counter and endure. So instead of spiraling, I want to leave you today with the words of another Gazan, Mohammed R. Maush. He's a journalist who wrote an article for MSNBC right after the election titled, "My family and I survived the war in Gaza. We know Trump's America won't save us." And here's Mohammed. For us, the election of Donald Trump isn't just a blip on the political radar or a shift in foreign policy. It's a challenge to sustain existence while the world seems intent on erasing us. It's about surviving 77 years under occupation and over a year of ongoing genocide. The very genocide I barely survived last December, when my family and I, including my elderly parents and 3-year-old son, were buried under the rubble of what was once our home after it was struck by an Israeli-fired U.S. missile. The date, December 7th, 2023. Our bones were crushed between layers of concrete and twisted metal as we spent hours in the dark, buried together and praying to be pulled out in one piece. The trauma of that night, in both its physical and emotional toll of my son's small, fragile hand clinging to mine, comes back to me now as Trump prepares to take power once more. I've seen how American political leaders toy with the idea of change, how they dress up their campaigns with grand ideas about peace and justice. Yet each president brushes off our reality. Barack Obama promised hope and change we could believe in, yet we got more bombs. Joe Biden offered a different approach, pledging unyielding support for Israel, leaving us to live through even more horror. Vice President Kamala Harris's niceties included no concrete promises to protect Palestinians, but she did pledge to continue financial support for Israel. And Trump's bluntness, as he promises to come back swinging, reminds us not to hold out hope for change. So, not much optimism here, but I do really recommend reading that article that MSNBC published. It's bleak but important, especially given the fact that we may be soon entering a world where it would be harder for people like Mohammed to express their feelings and their truth to an audience. I don't think it's unlikely that a clampdown is coming on some of these things. It's hard to say how extensive it will be. But there's a threat that, Israel and their backers see in the way that public sympathy has built so quickly for Gaza in a way that wasn't present with a lot of previous stages of violence between Israel and Gaza, right? Now, this is the result of a lot of videos spreading on social media. It's the result of voices from Gaza getting out and getting to people in a way they really hadn't before. And so one thing that does worry me greatly when I think about what's going to happen in Gaza under President Trump is not just what's going to happen to the people living there right now, but what's going to happen to their ability to tell their story, to get information out to the rest of us. That is very much an open question at this moment, but it's certainly one that should be on your lips, and it's one that we will be investigating here at Cool Zone as long as we're able to continue doing that. Until next time, I'm Robert Evans. We'll be back tomorrow and every other day reporting on, the world.
When someone you love is facing cancer, you want to do more than send a card or flowers that will wilt in a week. You want to actually help. That's where the Balm Box comes in. Our care packages are built from research with over 500 cancer patients and caregivers, packed with items people actually use during treatment. Think soothing, practical, thank goodness I have this kind of relief. For you, it's not just a gift, it's a way to show up in a moment where words fall short. For them, it's comfort, calm, and a reminder they're not alone. From chemo-friendly boxes to mastectomy recovery kits, even options for men, we've made it simple to give something that's elegant, premium, and genuinely useful. And yes, domestic shipping's always free on orders over $50, because making someone feel cared for shouldn't be complicated. So skip the empty get well soon. Send real help, real comfort, and maybe even a laugh. Visit thebalmbox.com. That's TheBalmBox.com. Balm, like healing and care. The Balm Box, because cancer patients don't need bouquets and brownies. They need balm.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Usually on This Podcast Will Kill You, we talk about the diseases, infections, and biological threats that can make us really sick.
But right now, we're doing something a little different.
We're stepping back and looking at what the human body needs to keep going.
When you consider what we know about sleep in humans, there's one rule that comes out. We are predictably unpredictable sleepers.
We're talking about why sleep works the way it does, why our bodies don't follow neat rules, and why modern life makes rest so hard to come by.
The second half of our series takes us to the digestive system with a multi-part series on what happens after we eat.
Okay, I just have to say that all of my favorite words apparently are digestive words.
Sphincter, peristalsis, duodenum. It's fascinating, it's funny, and it matters so much more than you think.
Episodes of our new series run from January 20th through February 17th, with new episodes every Tuesday on the Exactly Right Network.
Listen to This Podcast Will Kill You as part of the Exactly Right Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong with a podcast called The Red Weather.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth.
You can now binge all episodes of The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When you feel uncomfortable, what do you put on?
Biggie.
You put on Biggie when you feel uncomfortable?
Because I want to get confident.
This is DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy, a new podcast from me, a DJ and licensed therapist that asks one simple question. Who do you want to be? And what's the song that can take you there? Music changes what you feel, and what you feel changes what you do, right? That moment where a song shifts something inside you, that's where transformation starts. This year, I'm talking to experts across every area of life, like personal finance icon Jean Chatzky, New York Times journalist David Gellis, relationship legend Dan Savage, human connection teacher Mark Groves, and the man who shaped my ear more than anyone, Questlove. They'll bring the strategies, I'll pair them with the right records, and we'll teach you how to use the music to make change stick. This isn't just a podcast. It's unconventional therapy for your entire year. Listen to DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast that's about trade policy now. I'm your host, Mia Wong. This is amazingly going to be the fun one of all of these episodes. It's about fucking tariffs. So it's going to be a long week.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was the voice of the singular Garrison Davis, the one, the only.
Yes. Hello. I'm excited to hear about tariffs. It's tariff talk here on It Could Happen Here.
Woo.
One of my favorite topics, I guess, now.
All right, Garrison, we're putting you on the spot. What is a tariff?
It's basically...
It's Googling tariff.
No. A tariff is when Trump says China's bad, so he makes China pay extra money to sell their goods to Americans. And luckily, China pays for all of it, and the American consumer gets off with a boosting economy. That's at least what I've heard.
Yeah, so unfortunately for everyone, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's some accelerationists who are probably really excited about this.
Most certainly.
the way this actually works is, okay, so the government sets up a tariff, and that means if anyone is bringing a good into the U.S., they have to pay the tariff on it, and that money goes to the government. So, okay, there's been a long history of tariffs in the U.S. This was a huge domestic policy thing, particularly in the 1800s. That's really fucking boring. The incredibly short version of it is that the thing about tariffs is that, especially like tariffs on a specific sector, is that they're good for you manufacturing that thing, kind of, mostly, and they're bad for anyone trying to buy that good because it's now more expensive. So Trump's plan, and we're going to get into a bit more detail about this because there's parts of Trump's tariff plan that everyone seems to have forgotten about for some reason that I don't know why they've forgotten about. But the basic plan is to impose something like a 10 to 20% tariff on all goods that enter the U.S. from anywhere. There's specifically one for Mexico, but the numbers on what the Mexico tariff is changes every time he opens his mouth. Sometimes it's like 25%. There's one where it's like 250%.
Of course. Two interchangeable percentages.
Yeah, and then for China, it's supposed to be a tariff of somewhere between 60% is the most commonly cited number, but he's also said 100% tariff.
Once again, basically the same thing.
Yeah, and so, part of what we, unfortunately, the rest of us who live in the normal world have to do is figure out what is actually going to happen if we get, for example, 20% tariffs on all goods entering the U.S. and a 60% tariff on goods from China. So the first thing you need to understand, and I think most people kind of get this now, but the thing about a tariff is that you pay for it. So the way that it works in general is that this is just an additional cost for the company that's doing the like moving the good around, right? And so they are almost always going to just pass that cost directly on to you. Obviously, sometimes, and we've talked about pricing, the way that pricing works a lot on this show. Companies tend not to want to raise prices largely because of their effects on consumer happiness and brand loyalty and stuff like that. So sometimes people will just eat shit on it. But if you're talking about a 60% tariff, the 60% tariff is going to be paid for by you.
So that means that anytime we buy something that's either from Mexico or China or any of the other countries that this will be applied to, the easiest way for these companies to get around the tariff is just to pass off the cost to the consumer.
Yeah, and it's actually worse than that because, and this is something I don't think people really understand. When you think about global trade, right, people tend to think about trade as something that happens between countries. And this is something that was an old, during like the anti-globalization movement, people sort of understood this and kind of don't now. Trade doesn't actually really happen between countries. Most trade is one company, an international company, moving a resource from one country to another, right? So like trade is fucking Amazon moving something from a warehouse in one country to a warehouse in a second country, right? Now, I've seen a lot of people, and this ranges from like very, very serious sort of, news sources and economists trying to sort of just directly model what the price increases are going to be. I've seen people be like, oh, your shirts are going to cost 60% more, or physical video games will stop existing because they're too expensive. And who gives a shit? Why are we even trying to do sectoral modeling of the impacts of this? If you try to impose a 60 to 100% tariff on goods from China and a 20% tariff on all goods into the country, the economy will collapse. I don't know why everyone is pretending that this won't fucking happen. We're going to get into it in a second. I guess the reason why people are pretending this is happening because the way they're doing the modeling kind of assumes that it won't, which is baffling, incomprehensible nonsense.
Well, and that's especially amusing because the seemingly biggest issue this year around politics has been inflation, which has impacted every country around the globe. The U.S. has actually weathered it decently well, although there's been a catastrophic failure in communicating that and listening to the actual complaints from like people on how they're still struggling with rising inflation. But still, a big reason why Trump was elected is because he simply is not Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And he's not from the Biden-Harris administration. And there's this perception that he will be able to fix the economy. He will be able to get around inflation, lower prices, when seemingly his main economic proposal will lead to what's probably going to be an economic collapse if it happens in the totality of which he proposes.
Yeah, and there's another element of this, right? When I say that the likely result of Trump actually trying to implement his tariff policy is a global economic collapse, there's another part of this that everyone seems to have forgotten. And I don't know why they've forgotten this. I guess it's because nobody actually reads any of the things that Trump puts out on his website.
Which is true. No one actually reads that stuff.
It's nuts.
Especially his own supporters.
Yeah.
A majority of his own supporters do not pay attention to like daily news.
Yes, and now I remember this because I did an episode about these tariffs like 6 months ago. And one of the things about this, he has a thing called Agenda 47, right? Which was his agenda for what he's going to do when he takes power.
Which no one has cared about.
Yes.
And now everyone is going through and posting policy proposals from like fucking 2 years ago with the headline, "Breaking news, Trump announces new plan." You're like, no, he hasn't.
Yeah, these are old plans.
This stuff is like 2 years old. He's been openly talking about all this.
Yeah, for ages. And one of the important parts of this, I'm just going to read this quote because it is a part of this that has been ignored by every single fucking analysis I've seen from like fucking the Center for American Progress, who obviously were going to screw this up, to like Stanford's labs. Like everyone who's been writing about this has just ignored this part, which is, quote, "As one of his top economic priorities, President Trump will stop the flow of American jobs overseas by passing the Trump Reciprocal Trade Act. Under the landmark legislation, if any foreign country imposes a tariff on American-made goods that is higher than the tariff imposed by the U.S., President Trump will have the authority to impose a reciprocal tariff on that country's goods." Okay, so what this would do, again, is that any country that has a tariff already or imposes a tariff, and this is important if we get into a trade war where countries start imposing tariffs on each other in retaliation for their other tariffs, which is what happened when he did this trade war with China in like 2018, 2019. That means that we're also going to impose a tariff, which means that the tariff rates don't stay at 10 to 20%. They cyclically spiral upwards.
That's just like an escalating series of tariffs.
Yeah. And the thing is, right, the policy proposals that they have on his page are like, well, okay, we're going to do this through like a presidential act, right? But the thing is, the president actually has really, under a number of different acts, has extremely wide discretionary authority to set tariffs as long as he can basically sort of like cobble together some kind of bullshit excuse for it. And at that point, you're relying on the Supreme Court to stop literally anything that Trump does. Like, they don't give a shit.
Well.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe someone will like go up to like King Clarence Thomas and go like, "Hey, if we do this, like importing new like windshield wipers for your RV is going to cost $10 million more or whatever." But like, there's no shot of this stuff getting stopped. And the thing is, right, the reciprocal tariff stuff, he could just do this through his existing tariff authority. He doesn't actually even need to pass something through Congress, which would actually be, I think, tricky for him, but he doesn't need to.
Do you know what we need to do right now, though, Mia? Just badly.
Cut to a bunch of companies that are going to be absolutely fucking eviscerated if this goes through.
That's right. Donald Trump stands for anti-capitalist action. He's going to destroy free trade. So enjoy these ads when you still can. Okay, we are back. Mia, let's hear how Trump is going to perfect the capitalist economic system by a series of escalating tariffs that will destroy the economy, and in doing so, providing the opportunity for Marxists to seize power and change the world economic system.
Yeah, so I'm going to read another quote from that same Agenda 47 thing. Quote, "For example, food items like cereals or other preparatory goods are tariffed at 32.9% by India, 19.5% by China, and only 3.1% by the U.S. India applies a tariff of 25.3% on transportation equipment, while the U.S. only tariffs those goods at 2.9%. Now, those exact numbers are debatable, but it doesn't matter because these are going to be vibes-based ones based on how pissed off Trump is at a country.
Yeah, as Trump is usually a vibes-based guy.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the economy, especially when it comes to like these numbers he's pulling out, like between 60 to 100%. He doesn't know what any of those numbers means. He's just thinking of a number and saying it out loud.
And the thing about all of these things, right? Even just the base 20%, or let's go to the lowest numbers he's talked about, which is a 10% tariff on all goods and a 60% tariff on Chinese goods, right? That in and of itself blows a smoking crater in the world economy. And none of the assessments that you will read are talking about this. One of the things that they will mention that is true, but they're not, getting to the importance of, is that this affects stuff that's made in the U.S. Because the thing about things that are made in the U.S. is that they're made from components that are from elsewhere, because that's how international supply chains work.
Oh, wait, even though we have, through tariffs, moved all manufacturing of Toyota into the United States, you're saying that still some of the materials are not all solely made and produced within the country, and it actually requires on foreign trade?
Yeah, and part of the problem, I think, of okay, so if you logically think out the conclusions of what that means, right?
Okay, first mistake, Amia, that you're trying to solve this problem through logic.
You won't, but here's the thing, right? Obviously, Trump is not going to think through this, right? But I kind of expect people who are writing about this for a living to do mildly better than this.
And possibly some of the people that he hires onto his cabinet and team, maybe, but we'll see.
Well, no, I'm not talking about his critics.
Oh, sure.
One of the numbers you'll see all the time, the Center for American Progress has this line about how the tariffs will function as a tax that costs the American consumer $1,700 a year, right?
Which was the line that Kamala used pretty often.
Yeah.
Framing his tariffs as a sales tax.
This is fucking horseshit. The only way you can think that the net effect of this would just be a $1,700 tax is if you don't understand how the economy works at all, right? So I went through and read this, and the way that they model it is just by they find the net dollar value of imported goods and then apply a tax to it and then try to figure out how much of those goods that the average person would buy in a year and then increase the price. And this is something that's very important. At the end of the analysis, right at the very end, there's a little section where they say that they assume this would have no other effects on the economy. This is unbelievably fucking stupid. I cannot emphasize enough.
Can you explain why that doesn't make any sense?
So here's the thing, right? Prices go up. Now people can buy less things. What does that do to the economy? Well, it slows its growth rate, right? Companies start to go out of business. And we're going to get into more of the ways that this plays out in a second, right? But a bunch of people in a bunch of places fucking lose their jobs because suddenly the reduction in consumer demand means that there's a fucking reduction in necessary production. And this has cyclical effects throughout the entire economy as more and more people fucking lose their jobs. And also, the thing about those people who lose their jobs is that also fucking reduces demand because those people are now even less able to afford the stuff that's been increased by inflation prices. And this spirals through the entire world economy. In order to understand what exactly this is going to do, I think we need to understand why, because if Kamala Harris, I don't know if it makes any difference in the election, but Kamala Harris walks on the stage and says, this is going to cost you $1,700. She does not walk on the stage and say, this is going to cause an economic collapse, right? And I think the reason that happened is because we've gotten into this place where nobody fucking understands how the economy works at all in a way that's even worse than it was even in the 2010s. Because in the 2010s, I think people sort of had a vague understanding that the thing that was happening to the economy was Uberization, whatever you call it, was the expansion of gig work, right? There was sort of an understanding and a focus on the very sort of low-level parts of the economy. What are you, a poor person, doing for your job, right? How does your income work? And not purely on these sort of high finance, or in the case of what's been happening here, everyone has been unbelievably completely focused on the CHIPS Act and state-led industrialization, and all of that stuff is fucking bullshit. It basically hasn't done anything yet. It's not going to do anything for a decade, and it's not mostly what's going on in the economy. I've been holding my tongue on this for years, but the people who have been writing about the economy don't understand how the fuck it works because they've been completely myopically obsessed with the idea that we're in this new era of state capitalism, and no, the actual thing that's been happening in the economy. And I think if you are a person who buys stuff, you probably understand this, but for some reason this has never made it to economists or people who fucking write about the economy for a living, is consumer to manufacturer sales. So this is stuff like Temu, this is stuff like Shein, Shein, invented, it's a strong word, but they're one of the first people who sort of popularized this model, right? And this is a thing where you have a platform that lets people nominally buy directly from the factories or from, the people who are producing fruit, right? And these factories aren't producing goods until basically either people order the goods or analytics tells them to order it. So they don't have a lot of the problems that other kind of like distribution models have. You have a bunch of goods sitting in a warehouse. You just don't have that because you don't start production until your sort of orders come in, your analytics come in. And the theory here is you can reduce costs by eliminating the middleman. But of course, a new kind of middleman emerged, and that is the drop shipper. Oh, God. So the drop shipper is just someone using the consumer to manufacturer pipeline, right? The platforms that are supposed to let you, the consumer, sort of just like buy directly from the thing and cut out middlemen. It's just someone doing that, but then turning around and selling you the result. And this has become just utterly fucking ubiquitous in the American economy. It's sort of like an integral part of the American scam economy now, too. As the American economy has been increasingly sort of riddled and consumed by scams and riddled and consumed by sort of like people trying to capitalize on like some fucking meme or some political thing. You know, you have all these people doing like dropship t-shirts, right? Where they can immediately come in and sell all of this stuff.
These like short-lived, like trend meme-based, either like fashion or even like goods. You know, we can talk about like the amount of like content creator merch that is all funneled through these like drop shipping companies.
Yeah, and it's also what's been it's the thing that's enabled like fast fashion to function in the way that it is right now, right?
Absolutely.
And this has become what consumption is in large swaths of the world is from this sort of like direct to consumer drop shipping shit, right?
Yeah.
Now the thing about these drop shipping things is that their profit margins are really, really low. They don't make that much money, and in fact, a lot of these things like hemorrhage money until they've basically, you know, they do the thing that Amazon did, right? Where like you lose money for a million years, but then eventually you have enough market share that you start making money again.
Yeah, because you make it so all your competitors basically can't function because you have prices that are so low. And then when you're the only one in the game with a sizable power or influence, you can raise prices and then you make tons of money. Also the Uber model, although Uber still isn't profitable.
Uber will never make any money, right? But the other thing here that's important is that, you know, so the margins of a company like Temu, right, which is like probably the biggest of these sort of companies now, are low. But Temu technically has tech money, like they have money to back them up, right? You know who doesn't have an unbelievable amount of just like capital sitting around that they could just instantly pull from if suddenly there is, I don't know, a 60% fucking price shock? Oh, wait, it's all of the fucking manufacturing, you know, like tiny manufacturing firms that these dropshipping things use to produce all their stuff, right? That infrastructure is very fragile. It's margins are very bad. And guess what happens to that shit if you impose 60% tariffs on it, right?
It just shuts down because that's the easiest option, right?
Yeah, and you know, and presumably, I think one of the other parts of this would be part of the reason that this has been happening is that a lot of this stuff has been being imported like under tariff loopholes, but like that loophole is not hard to close, right?
What tariff loopholes are you like referring to?
Oh yeah, so I talked about this in the Temu episode. There's loopholes on American tariffs where like if you're bringing stuff into the country that's below a certain value, it has to be above like $600 or something to like trigger a threshold.
Okay.
To like activate the tariffs applying to it. So people just like ship a bunch of like 1 billion boxes individually that are like $599 to go under the thing.
So you're saying I can still maybe buy my new Sonic the Hedgehog PS5 game, though. That should be fine. I'll be totally good.
Oh, God. Okay, so the other part of this that's important, right? So this is the kind of, I don't know if new is the right word, but this is the kind of recent part of the economy that's incredibly dependent on Chinese supply chains, right? That gets just liquefied if these tariffs go through. These are enormous companies that, you know, are going to just eat shit. And those companies eating shit have the sort of effects we talked about earlier, right? Which is it causes people to get fired. It causes growth collapses. It causes cyclical decreases in people's ability to buy things. And then also like demand decreases because people can't buy things. But this is like the new school supply chain stuff, right? Temu's a product of really the last 6 or 7 years. And it really only functions the way it does now and lasts about 4. But the previous 2 eras of supply chain logistics, right, which is sort of Walmart and Amazon, are both also almost completely dependent on Chinese supply chains, right?
Yeah.
There's a good JD Supra article, which is they're like a sort of business intelligence website, right? You know, it talks about how Walmart imports 70% of all of its goods from China.
Yeah, that tracks.
70%. 70, right? And the reason that it works like this is because Walmart's entire business model, all of their supply chains, all of their logistics, everything that they do, right, was designed basically hand in hand to be integrated into Chinese economic production. And you can't just move that shit instantly, right? And this is also true of something like Amazon, right? Where Amazon, like 63% of independent sellers on Amazon, this is from the same source, are Chinese, right? So what you're dealing with is vast parts of the American economy, right? The parts of the American economy that where you interface to buy things are based on goods that are suddenly going to have like 60 to 100% tariffs stapled onto them. Now, the thing that people have been talking about as the like, oh, well, here's the thing that will happen instead of the thing that's pretty obviously going to happen if this stuff happens, which is just the economic bubble we're in pops and everything starts to go to shit. People have been like, oh, well, this will just accelerate the shift of production of goods out from China. And like, I've been talking about this for like a fucking decade, right? Like the journal Chuang, which is something that I talk about a lot that I recommend people read, has been talking about this for literally ages and ages and ages. So people have been trying to move production out of China for ages. I mean, like one of the first big attempts to do this was in 2011 when there's a series of riots in China and people tried to move production of goods out of China and they couldn't do it. And the reason that they couldn't do it was because you have to find a country that has both like a relatively skilled and educated labor force and also has the infrastructure to be able to like match Chinese production. And so, I mean, we're talking about things like they have to have like a functioning electrical grid that is stable enough for production to function. And this rules out an enormous number of countries. And it's just really, really hard. And yeah, like Chinese capital has been moving away from its sort of old centers in the Pearl River Delta to places like Vietnam, right? But and this is the fucking big one, right? A lot of what's been happening for people have been talking about this thing called quote unquote decoupling, which is this separation of the U.S. and Chinese economy so that they're not like intertwined with each other. People think this is good for ideological reasons, or they think it's just something that's happening, and it's not. It's not happening. You know what else isn't happening? It's us not plugging these products and services.
I think we do legally have to plug them. So here they are. Here's the plugs for the products and services.
All right, now that you've decoupled yourself from your money to buy these products and services, let's talk a bit more about why decoupling is fucking bullshit. One, and this is something I've been saying on the show for years, like, people have this sort of fantasy that what's happening is that, okay, instead of making your thing in China, you make your thing somewhere else, and this means that American companies no longer have the supply chains running through China. That's not what's happening at all. On the financial front, what you have is actually increasing integration as China attempts to sort of like, you know, has been lifting restrictions on the ownership of different types of corporations to make it easier for foreign owners to actually come in and invest and put capital in China, right? The second thing that's happening is a lot of these supposedly like we're cutting China out of the supply chain things have been a bunch of Chinese companies starting to set up production in Mexico. Now, the thing about that, right, if Mexico was supposed to be the fucking panacea for getting us out of these tariffs, remember that Trump was talking about 200% tariffs on Mexico. And that's the country that's supposed to, like, fucking get us out of this mess by, like, oh, it'll be fine because, like, production will just shift away from China to where? Like, people, I mean, a lot of the assumptions I was reading was like people were talking about, oh, the production will like 25% of production will like shift to Canada. It's like, no, it won't. Canada doesn't have the fucking production facilities to do this. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
Canada doesn't have the population to do that.
No, it doesn't. And this is this sort of problem, right? You know, on the one hand, you know, China has been deindustrializing for like a decade and a half now, right? And kind of slowly, but the percentage of the population that's working in manufacturing has been steadily decreasing for years and years and years and years. But the problem is that when you move production out of a place, you actually have to have a second place to produce it. And there just haven't been, right? Like it's pretty easy to move low-end manufacturing. This is what's been happening, right? Like really cheap garment stuff, for example, has been moving to places like Bangladesh and Vietnam for a while. But once you start getting into the stuff that China produces like the most of, right, which is things like fucking cell phones, sort of mid-tier commodity production, that gets way, 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 way harder.
No, but the CHIPS Act will save us, Mia. I heard it from everyone on the television.
This is the sort of thing about this, right? Is if you read the analyses that people are doing of this, they just sort of assume that you can just like, oh, well, like naturally a bunch of the consumption that Americans are doing will stay the same because they'll go buy goods that aren't produced in China. It's like, okay, like where are you finding these goods from? Like, what production facilities are you just like suddenly that have just been like sitting there fallow are just suddenly gonna like appear out of nowhere? And the answer is like, that's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen partially because they don't exist and partially because, again, the immediate consequence of this is a massive economic collapse. China's economy has already been slowing for the, like, basically, I mean, it's been slowing since like 2008, really. Well, 2011 kind of. But It's especially been slowing in the past 2 or 3 years because of sort of COVID restriction stuff, and also just a kind of lackluster rate of returns on their own. Like, they had their own version of the 2008 housing bubble, and that's annihilated an unbelievable amount of money because it turns out investing in real estate doesn't work as is basis for your economy. But like, that's the thing, right? If the Chinese economy fucking goes down, right? That's 17% of the world's GDP.
17?
Yeah, of the total GDP, right? And it's like the economy isn't national in a way where you can have an economic collapse in another country and just a country that's that large and ignore it. And the thing I want to close on, and the reason we know that this is true, is that it is actually possible, kind of, to restart American domestic manufacturing, right? Reagan was able to do it in the 80s, and Reagan did it through this thing called the Plaza Accords, where he didn't literally put the prime ministers of Japan and West Germany at gunpoint, but he basically put them at gunpoint and forced them to increase the value of their currencies so that the U.S. currency would devalue, which makes it like a more competitive export economy. And this actually brought back American manufacturing for a while until it had to all be reversed under the Clinton administration in the reverse Plaza Accords, because the problem was when you sort of nuked the zero-sum manufacturing of a country like Japan, their fucking economy didn't work anymore. And in order to sort of bail out the Japanese economy and stop just a sort of world-rending economic collapse that would have just like tore the absolute shit out of the economy, the U.S. had to fucking re-increase the value of its currency and lose its whole domestic production base, right? You can't actually increase a production base in the world right now without decreasing it somewhere else. And that has sort of staggering ripple economic effects for the entire global economy, which is why even if Trump's plan worked somehow and didn't immediately cause an economic collapse by like the direct effect on American consumers, it would cause another economic collapse by the effect on fucking people in China. So,
well, Mia, I think you might be overreacting here a little bit, because at least food will be available. Obviously, I learned this on X, my main source for news. Is that agriculture is almost all done in the States. So we should be fine. Like, we'll still be able to eat food, right? I say, staring into the void.
No, you can't, because unfortunately the thing about American agriculture is it's all fucking mechanized agriculture. The thing about mechanized agriculture is that you need the mechanized part, and that's all fucking produced either in other countries or the John Deere fucking like tractor factories in the US are all unbelievably reliant on a bunch of parts that are made overseas. So
also, we do import a great deal of food.
Oh, we do. Yeah. Even just talking about the food that we produce here, right? Like, that's also going to be fun.
I wonder where your strawberries in November are coming from.
Oh, God.
Curious.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that this is only one aspect of how Trump will impact the economy. Obviously, his immigration policies could serve a similarly large financial problem if a whole bunch of agricultural jobs suddenly kind of vanish and farms and other processing plants just go out of business due to a lack in workers.
Yeah.
And even some people on Trump's team have started to acknowledge this, mostly Elon Musk, who has openly said that Trump's term will involve some, quote, temporary hardship. So between tariffs and mass deportations, like, even people on his team know that this is going to damage the economy, especially in the short term, if not the, like, forever term.
Yeah.
And yet he was still elected as the economically viable candidate.
Yeah, and I think the last part we should say in this is that it's not that you can't, like, fucking obliterate a giant portion of the American economy and still come out extremely popular because you've crushed the American working class. Like, that's what Reagan did, right? Like, Reagan and the Volcker shocks did this enormous, just put a crater in the American economy in Reagan's first term. Like, there's skyrocketing unemployment, just like real sort of economic devastation. But the thing about the Volcker shock was that the way he blew up the economy was really good for people who like fucking owned assets, like people who like owned bonds, like people who held other people's debt. It was great for those people.
And like the burgeoning investment economy, which now kind of dominates our entire economic system.
Yeah, and it was incredible for those people. And so it was fine. But the thing about this economic collapse is that this is also going to just absolutely fuck up the days of a bunch of extremely wealthy and influential capitalists. So, including, by the way, Elon Musk, whose Teslas are produced in China. Like, he has a gigafactory. He's a gigafactory in Xinjiang. So we'll see if Trump actually is able to implement this stuff. I think he's able to on a policy level. It's just politically, can he actually do these tariffs?
Yeah, it's unclear. It's also unclear what exact numbers he's going to run with. A 10% tariff will still be bad, but it's nothing compared to 100% tariff. I think Trump, by and large, just says whatever comes into his head without thinking through the actual logistical ends of what he's saying. And I think most Trump supporters do not take him literally as a person. At least they don't take what he says necessarily literally all the time. They take him seriously, but perhaps not literally.
Yeah, so we'll have to see how this actually plays out. If it does play out in the ways that Trump has said that it's going to play out, it is going to just unbelievably tank the economy in ways that absolutely suck. So yeah, that's happening here in the future. Maybe that's the name of the podcast, right?
So stock up on your PS5s now before they get harder to buy, and it'll be fine. Yeah, there'll be nothing else bad that happens to the economy as long as you have your PS5s.
Yeah, people always want fucking books at the end of episodes, so I'm just putting books at the end of episodes. This is my plugging Chuang, Chuang. We'll put it in the description. It's a bunch of stuff about Chinese economics. Mostly it's a sort of economic history of originally the socialist period and then the transition to capitalism, but it also has a bunch of very, very good stuff on trying to understand the Chinese economy. And so if you want to be about 10 years ahead of like guys who write for The Economist, if you read Chuang, you will end up being like 10 years ahead of those guys. So yeah, great stuff.
When someone you love is facing cancer, you want to do more than send a card or flowers that will wilt in a week. You want to actually help. That's where the Balm Box comes in. Our care packages are built from research with over 500 cancer patients and caregivers, packed with items people actually use during treatment. Think soothing, practical, thank goodness I have this kind of relief. For you, it's not just a gift. It's a way to show up in a moment where words fall short. For them, it's comfort, calm, and a reminder they're not alone. From chemo-friendly boxes to mastectomy recovery kits, even options for men, we've made it simple to give something that's elegant, premium, and genuinely useful. And yes, domestic shipping's always free on orders over $50, because making someone feel cared for shouldn't be complicated. So skip the empty get well soon. Send real help, real comfort, and maybe even a laugh. Visit thebalmbox.com. That's TheBalmBox.com. Balm, like healing and care. The Balm Box, because cancer patients don't need bouquets and brownies. They need balm.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Usually on This Podcast Will Kill You, we talk about the diseases, infections, and biological threats that can make us really sick.
But right now, we're doing something a little different.
We're stepping back and looking at what the human body needs to keep going.
When you consider what we know about sleep in humans, there's one rule that comes out. We are predictably unpredictable sleepers.
We're talking about why sleep works the way it does, why our bodies don't follow neat rules, and why modern life makes rest so hard to come by.
The second half of our series takes us to the digestive system with a multi-part series on what happens after we eat. Okay, I just have to say that all of my favorite words apparently are digestive words.
Sphincter, peristalsis, duodenum. It's fascinating, it's funny, and it matters so much more than you think.
Episodes of our new series run from January 20th through February 17th, with new episodes every Tuesday on the Exactly Right Network.
Listen to This Podcast Will Kill You as part of the Exactly Right Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong with a podcast called The Red Weather.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth.
You can now binge all episodes of The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When you feel uncomfortable, what do you put on?
Biggie.
You put on Biggie when you feel uncomfortable?
Because I want to get confident.
This is DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy, a new podcast from me, a DJ and licensed therapist that asks one simple question. Who do you want to be? And what's the song that can take you there? Music changes what you feel, and what you feel changes what you do, right? That moment where a song shifts something inside you, that's where transformation starts. This year, I'm talking to experts across every area of life, like personal finance icon Jean Chatzky, New York Times journalist David Gellis, relationship legend Dan Savage, human connection teacher Mark Groves, and the man who shaped my ear more than anyone, Questlove. They'll bring the strategies, I'll pair them with the right records, and we'll teach you how to use the music to make change stick. This isn't just a podcast. It's unconventional therapy for your entire year. Listen to DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Welcome to It Could Happen Here. And what it is today is me, James, and Mia Wong. Hi, Mia.
Hello.
Hi. What we are here to talk to you about today is something else, which, despite my positive tone of voice, is sad and depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a lot of that. And like, we don't want you to be too sad. It doesn't bear moping around, you know, like we've got time to get organized and that's what we should be doing. And also, like, just get out and go outside and see your friends and do things that bring you joy. Like, we'll work out how to get through it somehow, you know, like,
yep.
I think it's really easy. And I found myself doing this, stay at home and be sad, but don't. Like, I went out with some friends for a hike on Friday and I feel so much better. So I would advise you to do that. Maybe you're listening on your hike. That would be fun. Actually, I think if I was hiking, I would skip this one and listen to the birds and, you know, enjoy the outdoors.
Well, I mean, you know, if you want the ideological framing of it, the ideological framing of it is that morale is a charade of struggle.
Yes.
And it is very easy to lose if your morale is absolutely terrible. So
yeah, we got 4 years. We can't be moping around. Like we will get through it. We will find ways to make it better. And part of the way we do that, is keeping our morale up and doing things that bring us joy. The thing that brings me joy is talking about Rojava, the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. And we're going to talk about that today because we're talking about Donald Trump's foreign policy in his second term. So his previous foreign policy was a pretty mixed bag. And he bombed the shit out of the Islamic State, right? Cool, based. He also bombed the shit out of thousands of Syrian and Iraqi civilians. Not so cool. Also, we should note, not so different from every other president this century. Bombing civilians has been pretty much the through line of American foreign policy in that part of the world for a very long time. In particular, in the Trump administration, I want to talk about there was a single U.S. strike cell called Talon Anvil. I think they were mainly like CAG guys, from what I read. So Delta Force guys, Army Special Forces guys, who were making these decisions. They hired an office building in Syria, and these guys were constantly looking at drone feeds and various other information and then calling in strikes on various targets, right? I'm not sure if they had the CAG guys in the watching computers. I'm not entirely sure on why they didn't have someone else. Who knows? But this strike cell dropped more than 120,000 bombs. And
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. The amount of ordnance we dropped on Syria is insane. It circumvented procedures that were in place to prevent civilian deaths in order to do so. They had embedded lawyers who were supposed to approve the strikes, but these lawyers tried to raise the alarm that some of these strikes were reckless. They weren't hitting things that were actual targets. And they sort of ran into an organizational brick wall. At some point, pilots even refused to engage targets because they didn't think it.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's not usual.
Yeah, like that's be pretty fucked for a fighter pilot to be like, no. I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
No, I found this out in I think it was the New York Times. New York Times did a pretty good investigation, which will be linked in our sources. And yeah, it's like a throwaway line, but I would love to hear more about that. It could have been a drone pilot too, which is a slightly different gig, I guess. You know, if you're sitting north of Las Vegas, they're flying a drone, kind of a different scene. So in the battle to defeat the Islamic State, thousands of innocent people lost their lives.
Yeah.
As we reached the end of that battle, Donald Trump, who was president at the time, personally called Erdogan, who's the president of Turkey at the time, right, in late 2018. Trump asked Erdogan, if we withdraw our soldiers, can you clean up ISIS? That's a quote. According to an unnamed Turkish official interviewed by Reuters, Erdogan replied that Turkish forces were capable of a mission. Quote, then you do it, Trump told him. And asked his national security advisor, John Bolton, who was also on the call, to, quote, start work for the withdrawal of US troops from Syria. What this resulted in was US troops pulling out from some locations in Syria, right? Local people threw tomatoes at them. Even worse than the tomatoes was the fact that it gave NATO's second largest army, which is Turkey, of course, free rein to attack the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, which it did in 2018 and it did again in 2019. Those two operations to claim considerable ground in Syria, cost countless civilian lives, continue to perpetrate human rights abuses, to rehabilitate people from ISIS and other jihadi groups as Turkish Free Syrian Army. And they killed some people who were people I care about. And I continue to care about the cause of Rojava, or Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, very deeply. And it really fucking sucks to think about the potential of the US abandoning those people again. Not that Biden has done very much.
Yeah.
Now, I think this anecdote, right, of what Trump does with Erdogan tells us a lot about his approach to foreign policy, which is he really sees it as very transactional, which isn't that different from everything else he does, I guess. Like, he's a very transactional person. And he seems really only to be concerned about what he can get out of it. So, like, in this case, I guess he wants to say he brought US troops home from Syria. Like, he's anti-war. This is one of his things he says now, right? Like, but he's prepared to also, in the case of the bombing, right? He's not so concerned with civilian casualties as long as he can claim that he was the one who defeated ISIS, right? Obama couldn't do it. He did it. And he did it on a pile of civilian remains. And also using chiefly the Syrian Democratic Forces, right? Not US forces.
Yeah.
There were US forces on the ground. They were engaged in combat, but in minuscule numbers compared to the SDF, who lost 15,000 of their children in a battle against ISIS. And I think Trump would be very willing to admit that he's transactional, right? Like, that's kind of his brand, is like America first and fuck everyone else. So I think he'll probably be similar in this term, right? He will act unilaterally. He'll pivot whenever the fuck he feels like it. He will continue with his affection for strong men and dictators all around the world. But a lot of stuff has changed since Trump's first term. And I think it's illustrative for us to think about how he will engage with things that have changed. So what has changed? There's a much larger conflict between Russia and Ukraine now. And that conflict has been seen massive and overt support, both from the USA and from the rest of NATO. There's been a revolution in Myanmar. I suppose he doesn't know that.
Yeah, I really doubt. Well, maybe some of the like weird pro-coup memeing from the right got to him. But.
Yeah, perhaps. Or like, I mean, the parallels between the coup in Myanmar and January 6th are pretty obvious, right? Like if January 6th took the landing, it looked a lot like that, except that it was a military party, not just a political party. The Islamic State doesn't exist as a territorial entity, but it very much does exist as a terrorist group, which continues to and has actually increased its activity this month with sleeper cells, continued suicide bombings, continued attacks, and the SDF continue with their anti-ISIS operations. Without US support, those would be harder. And so we have to ask, I guess, on what Trump's going to do with these things. And I want to look at a few different issues and pick apart what Trump said on his campaign website, pick apart what he said on the campaign trail, and then look at who he's appointed so far. We're recording this on Tuesday, the 12th. So if someone gets appointed before you hear this, that's why we've missed them out. So I guess to start with Trump's foreign policy, we should talk about his number one peer competitor, which is China in his eyes, right? Not a big China appreciator. So I looked at his campaign website for this, which really has some just incredible use of capital letters. He just fucking does what he wants. It's wild to see. So chiefly, one of the things that he's been on about for a while now is tariffs on Chinese-made goods, right? As a means of foreign policy.
Yeah, we talked about this last episode.
Yeah. You will have heard about tariffs at this point.
Yeah.
So as we previously mentioned, right, he's talked about these tariffs. These tariffs would cost a lot of money, and they would increase the cost of you going shopping.
Yeah, and they would probably destroy vast swaths of the global economy.
Yes.
Both the Chinese and the American economy.
Yes. Yeah.
Just sort of implode.
And then all these countries in Africa and, Myanmar, for instance, exports a lot of these rare earth metals to China, right? And a lot of countries in Africa do too. Aside from the economic sort of aggression, his stance on Taiwan is weird, which is normally where we would expect to see the most physical friction between US and China, right? Mike Pompeo has pressed for the USA to formally recognize Taiwan before, which would be a step. There'd be a pretty big swing. Trump, on the other hand, seems to want Taiwan to pay the United States for being its ally right now.
Yeah, then this is one of his big sort of foreign policy principles is try to get people to pay him for stuff because that's sort of the only way his brain works. But I mean, remember, he did this with NATO a lot, where he's hit this whole line on NATO that NATO should be paying us because people they're not spending enough on defense, so we're paying all their defense budgets. This is one of his kind of...
Yeah, it's been his hobby horse.
Yeah, floats around in his brain, sort of colliding with its walls.
Yeah.
An empty space there.
yeah, like a ping pong ball. Ironically, in the time that Trump's been out of office, Russian aggression has led NATO members to spend more on defense.
Yeah.
Rather than Donald Trump lambasting them. So one of his big things is that Taiwan should pay the United States. But it would seem very unlikely that he's not going to abandon Taiwan, I don't think, because it gives him a place to grandstand on China.
Yeah, and also, one of the things about Trump is that one of the best ways to sort of influence him is just get a world leader in a room with him alone.
Yes.
But unfortunately, fortunately for us, Trump does not speak Chinese, and Xi Jinping doesn't seem to like him very much, so...
Yeah, yes, we won't be joining the PRC anytime soon. China, along with Russia, right, the two countries we've spoken about most so far, both make big plays in Africa. Russia has rebranded what was Wagner as the Africa Corps, and they're sort of providing support to regimes that lack enough legitimacy to exist otherwise.
Yeah.
They are sort of classic mercenary shit, is your state illegitimate and does it lack the capacity to do the violence it needs to maintain itself? Don't worry, here are some psychopaths from Russia.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of people, I think, because a lot of these sort of governments will kind of do their put a red beret on and start doing their anti-imperialist cosplay, and then you read the fine print of the contracts they've signed with Africa Corps, a thing that you expect to be spelled Africa and Corps with a K, KORPS, and it's oh, okay, so they've signed away a bunch of the country's mineral rights, and they've signed away a bunch of these specific mines to this mercenary groups. It's oh, okay, so this is also this is also just imperialism. It's just new management.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just different imperialism, and China has big plays in Africa too, right? I've personally seen a lot of Chinese-owned mines in Africa, Chinese roads in Africa. China does also offer infrastructure. China does a kind of quid pro quo. It doesn't come in with the violence like Russia does. It comes in with the we'll build you a hospital if we can have all your natural resources. US policy in Africa is pretty much to stop those two countries getting too much influence. The Biden administration is, as many liberals are, right? There's actually not that much difference between what Biden and Trump will do in Africa. The difference is that Biden is smart enough not to say it. Trump's ability to do anything useful in Africa is going to be masked by his massive racism. When he says things like shithole countries, it becomes a lot harder for the US to do anything in Africa that isn't tinged by that, right? It doesn't make that sort of imperialist ambition more obvious. US politicians rarely talk about Africa. They rarely campaign on what they were going to do in Africa. And so pretty much the only things we're going to hear from Donald Trump about Africa, I would imagine, are going to be when he lets his racism out.
Yeah.
That will have results for like US credibility.
Also, my guess is we see intensifications of sort of US drone strikes, particularly in the Horn, and we see like all of the stuff that Biden is doing, but worse, and killing even more people somehow.
Yeah, I would imagine that we will see these more aggressive drone strikes, especially against like Islamist groups in Africa. The US has special forces deployments in a few places in Africa, which it will probably maintain, I would imagine. Like, I don't think those are like things that Trump he wouldn't see any benefit from stopping them, I guess. And it may not even know about them. So yeah, I think we will see little change in Africa, would be my guess.
Yeah, mildly worse.
Yeah. Talking of mildly worse, Mia, the thing that makes these podcasts mildly worse is our obligation to pivot to advertisements, which we must do now.
That was a great one. We've been holding out on you for 3 years to get you the good ad pivots.
Yeah. Anyway, well, there it is. That's what we've got for you. All right, we're back. So I want to talk about Europe. As you've heard in the tariffs episode, right, he wants to put tariffs on European goods. The European Union is going to slap tariffs right back on American goods. That doesn't really help anyone. It will make exporting from the USA very, very hard. One thing that the USA might stop exporting is weapons to Ukraine. It's a little unclear. Trump, he called Zelensky the greatest salesman on earth, but has also claimed that he can personally end the war in 24 hours. I don't think that means he will be deploying himself to the Donbass like a like a Gundam, but he claims he can do this with his negotiating skills. This seems unlikely, to put it mildly. I don't think that it would be possible to end this war in 24 hours. If both sides declared peace right now, getting communications to their frontline troops would be a challenge in 24 hours in some places.
Yeah.
So the way I interpret this, and I may be wrong here, is that he is likely to leverage the support that the United States gives to Ukraine in order to force Zelensky into an unfavorable settlement, which would achieve his goal of A, being able to say he stopped giving American money to Ukraine, which has been a big talking point for the, every time you saw it with the Western North Carolina right after the hurricane, all these Republican sort of talking points were like, oh, well, all the money's in Ukraine, so we can't have fucking MREs for people in Western North Carolina. Or like FEMA has no money because we sent Ukraine some M4s. This is very silly, right? It's not a zero-sum game. It's not really a reasonable critique. But it's one that Trump has kind of managed to stick in the culture wars. His base seems to see the money going to Ukraine as directly coming from things that would otherwise be going to them, which he would benefit from if he could bring this war to a close, right? J.D. Vance has mentioned a demilitarized zone in between Russia and Ukraine, which who's gonna administer the DMZ? Do we really want this? Are we gonna have troops there like we do in South Korea for when was the Korean War? The 1950s, 70 years. Right, I don't think that's really what they want.
Yeah, the thing about DMZs is no one actually likes them.
No, they suck. It sucks.
Yeah, they're awful.
It's just a bit of land that you can yeet weapons over at each other. Like, especially in like modern warfare, they're not that effective at stopping two people fighting. Right, but very funny that North Korea will be 2 for 2 on DMZs in wars it has been involved with. Huge dub for them. He essentially seems to be advocating for exactly the peace settlement that Putin has proposed and that has been rejected multiple times. Several sources I've seen suggest that Trump has spoken to Putin quite a few times since leaving office. His plan for Ukraine certainly seems closer to the Russian one than the Ukrainian one. The Ukrainian one being stop invading us and go home. And the Russian one being, well, we'll just keep all the stuff we've taken so far and then add a buffer zone in between. And Ukraine can keep whatever's left of its country, right? What's interesting to me is what other NATO members will do in the event of the US reducing its aid. I would suspect that they will try and step up and meet that gap. It might also result in the US puts certain restrictions on its aid, right? How it can be used, where it can be used, crucially, right? Like they don't like Ukraine using things to attack in Russia proper.
Yeah.
They don't mind them using them to attack Russian forces, but not within Russia. I did see a picture yesterday of I think it was 3 guys from Rogue, I think it's called, which is a unit within the International Legion who had been killed within Russia, and they had a lot of like 84s and things like that, right? Like US anti-tank weapons. But the United States doesn't want Ukraine using the long-range artillery and stuff. It's given it to yeet projectiles at Moscow. I can see a situation where if the US draws down some of its aid, European allies of Ukraine might not place some of those restrictions on their aid. And that could lead to some interesting complications for Russia, right? If Ukraine is more effective, like if they get more aid from Europe and Europe doesn't place restrictions on their aid, they could potentially strike Russia within Russia, which is not going to be good for Putin. And it's probably not going to be good for like bringing, I mean, unless they could deal some really crippling blows, it might not be good for bringing the war to an end. But maybe it will. Maybe like they've done some pretty effective things with not a huge amount so far.
I don't know. Maybe they'll get lucky on a strike on the Kremlin or something.
Yeah. Just the one, like, I'm sure that would be their strategy if they didn't have restrictions. Would be to just keep pounding places they think Putin might be.
This is the history of Russian warfare. Dumber things than that have happened and have lost Russia wars. So
yeah, a lot dumber than that. So yeah, I don't think that Ukraine will be screwed if the US pulls out. I do think it will be a lot harder for them.
Yeah.
And if that's something, there are a lot of US citizens still fighting in Ukraine. It would be pretty devastating to abandon Ukraine. And I think also just from the sort of stopping Russian aggression standpoint, it's much better to stop it here than somewhere else. But yeah, we will see. I guess European countries are really ramping up their defense, but right now the US is like the heart of the military-industrial complex, and Europe really can't keep up with the US production. Of course, the US being the heart of the military-industrial complex does mean that a lot of Trump donors will probably be able to leverage some of their donations to his campaign, and so we might not see as much of a drawdown of aid to Ukraine as we're worrying about here. Mia, talking of launching things from a long distance at a very small target, I would like to launch these advertisements from iHeartMedia's advertising department directly to your ears. Here you go.
It's all so bad.
Mm-hmm.
As we were recording this, it's come out that the new Secretary of Defense is going to be Pete Hegseth, who's like a Fox News guy who doesn't believe germs are real.
Yeah, this is a guy who has not washed his hands in 10 years. Great.
I mean, at least he might die of COVID.
Yeah, I was going to say, he made it. Wow. Sorry, that hair is really something.
Oh, that's not good at all.
Yeah.
Wait, what? On June 14th, 2015, Hegseth accidentally hit a West Point drummer with an axe while filming a live TV segment in honor of Flag Day. His Wikipedia is incredible.
Let's get that link pulled up. All right, this video is unavailable. All right, no, we're finding this video. Nothing disappears from the internet. All right, here we go. No! I missed the fucking target. My God. This is just clown shit. Like, what? Like, I need to, listen, if you were hit in the dick and balls by an axe thrown by future Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, please contact Coolzone Media at iHeartMedia.com. I hope the VA is paying for this man's benefits.
This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen someone do, like in the course of reporting for this show.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like, very funny. Again, please contact us. I hope you're okay. Service-related injury. Yeah, so that's Pete Hegseth, right? Future SecDef. Also, former reservist who deployed to Guantanamo, was an infantry platoon leader at Guantanamo. I think he also deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, and previously he'd also deployed to Iraq. He did two voluntary deployments, or he's in 2 locations in Iraq at least. So he's hit the greatest hits of US foreign policy in the last 20 years, I guess. He's made his career as a Fox News pundit.
Yeah, he's just like a right-wing ghoul.
Yeah, I mean, in the last Trump administration, when he was punditing, he advised Trump had been considering pardoning several war criminals and did pardon several war criminals, right? And Hegseth was one of the people who, A, he talked about it on Fox News while he was advising Trump to do it, and B, he was advising Trump to do it.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. You can read up about the Trump pardons of war criminals.
Yeah. It's bad enough that a guy was getting turned in by his own special forces unit. Like, do you know how fucking hideous the shit you have to do is for your own guys in a special forces unit to be like, holy shit, we have to stop this guy.
Yeah.
Like, it's awful.
Yeah. I mean, you should look up Clint Lawrence's stuff as well. Like, Lorince, if you're interested in this stuff. He was convicted, I think, of 2 murder counts for ordering his soldiers to fire on unarmed people. And then, the other one was a Green Beret named Matt Goltshian, who was also charged with the murder of someone in Afghanistan, someone who had been making IEDs. So, like, I think we can see where this guy is going. We've just found this out as we're recording for context. Like, that's quite troubling.
Yeah.
His other 2 foreign policy appointments that I've seen so far have been less so. Look, I'd say less so. Marco Rubio's a turd, right? Like I think we all know that I share very little with Marco Rubio. On Turkey and Rojava, he is good. He is not a fan of Erdogan. He's in contact with Gulenists. He kind of puts Turkey in the BRICS box.
He's a Gulen.
Yeah, which leads us to the very funny idea of Marco Rubio ordering a drone strike on Eric Adams.
I mean, well, here's the thing, though. Gulen's dead now, so like there's like a secession crisis of like who's going to head up the Gulen's network, and I'm proposing it's Marco Rubio,
the Gulenist anti-pope Marco Rubio. Yeah. That could be very good for Rojava, at least, right? The big concern among those of us who care very deeply about Rojava has been that Trump will abandon them, as he did in the past, right? And so I guess we're looking for glimmers of hope. And I think Rubio kind of oddly, weirdly was one compared to, I was expecting more of the Hegseth, like Fox News commentator type people in foreign policy positions. Because Trump fundamentally doesn't care about foreign policy, and like it's an area where he can kind of give something to those kind of like insane far right commentator types. He also did appoint Mark Waltz. I think it could be Walls. He's one of the first Army Special Forces guys serving Congress, maybe the first, as a national security advisor. Walls is a member of the Kurdish caucus in Congress. So again, positive for Rojava. Talking of Army Special Forces, there's one more insane Trump foreign policy proposal that I want to discuss.
Yeah.
And that is his desire to use the United States Army in Mexico. I'm just going to read from his campaign website here. President Trump will take down the drug cartels just as he took down ISIS. He will impose a total naval embargo on cartels, order the Department of Defense to inflict maximum damage on cartel leadership and operations, and designate cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and choke off their access to the global financial system. President Trump will get the full cooperation of neighboring governments to dismantle the cartels, or else expose every bribe and kickback that allows these criminal networks to preserve their brutal reign. He will ask Congress to ensure that drug smugglers and traffickers can receive the death penalty. There's a lot there. The way that Donald Trump helped defeat ISIS was exclusively by bombing things and with some small contributions from US ground troops. But we don't really have a partner force in Mexico like that. And I think, especially with the new administration in Mexico, and especially with Trump proposing 100% tariffs on Mexican goods, we're unlikely to find one, which leaves the very strange kind of prospect of US troops carrying out like unapproved, undeconflicted hits on Mexican nationals in Mexico, which like is an act of war.
Yeah.
You are invading Mexico is what you're doing. I should point out that Bortak under Biden did shoot one Mexican national this year he was holding up migrants with a gun. He's rubbing them with a gun. It's a place where I've been dozens of times where they shot him. And there didn't seem to be much fuffle about that, but that is not invading Mexico.
Yeah, like if they're invading Mexico, like, you know, as close as American-Mexican sort of security cooperation has been, and as many people as that's killed from the Mexican side, like that's Oh boy.
Yeah, like it remains to be seen how much of this actually happens, right? Mexico has a new president. The United States has a new president. They're not exactly politically fellow travelers, I'll say that. But
yeah, I mean, I will say, like, AMLO and Trump got along, like, decently well, largely off of AMLO's, like, anti-immigrant policies, but I don't know if that's going to work with Sheinbaum. Like,
and, like, in the final year of AMLO, like, they did a lot to help Biden with effectively enforcing U.S. border policy by deporting people south. People I spoke to in the Darien series have been sent south again this week. But Biden's had actually some pretty high-profile cartel arrests, right, within Sinaloa cartel. He's destabilized that cartel, but those happen within the U.S. They didn't send teams into Mexico. And the way that the U.S. has traditionally got hold of cartel leaders before is for them to be arrested in Mexico in cooperation with Mexican government forces, be they police or military, and then extradited them to the U.S. for trial. That doesn't seem to be what Trump is proposing. But again, like, the bombastic rhetoric and the reality are sometimes very different.
Yeah, I have some vague memory that he, like, last time he wanted to, like, send special forces guys to do this, and his advisors were like, what the fuck are you talking about? We can't send, like, people into Mexico.
Yeah, look, just to be real, those organizations have reach inside the United States, and that would be an extremely messy situation.
Yeah.
And, like, the way this would have to be done, right? I don't think you can do this with drone strikes. You have to do this with boots on the ground, and that's going to be contrary to what he's promised to do, which is not risk more US soldiers' lives. Who knows what this will actually look like?
Yeah, my guess is he will find a way to get the maximum number of civilians killed.
Yes, yeah. We
do it himself.
Yeah,
like that's probably going to be the result of this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we sort of wind this down, like, civilian deaths are probably going to increase, right? He's never shown himself to be unduly concerned about those things. He doesn't see that as the problem. The second thing the US will lose is what Joseph Nye called soft power, right? Which is like the power to influence people without projecting force. Cultural power, cultural capital, as Bourdieu might have called it. Really getting heavy on the university shit at the back half of this episode. The US lost a lot of that in the first Trump term, right? And it will lose more of it in the second Trump term. Some of that is, the US maybe shouldn't be influencing, and the US has had some pretty malign influence around the world.
Yeah.
You can listen to a song called Washington Bullets to learn more about it. But it will mean that, like, there will be a space for other bad actors, right? Russia, China. Russia has not shown itself to be any more concerned with human rights, and probably less so than the United States went in its time in Syria, right? It's been an unmitigated disaster for the Syrian people, the Russian cooperation with the Assad regime. We do not need more of that around the world. The Wagner/Africa Corps deployments in Africa have been horrific in terms of human rights, and this will open more spaces for that. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't look great. This SecDef appointment, maybe we'll learn more about that in the coming days, but that doesn't look great. There are some bright spots for Rojava, I guess, or some glimmers of hope there, which is a nice thing. Trump's policy on Gaza fits with this general model of, like, he wants to end conflicts, and the way he sees of doing that is doing away with any restraint in terms of civilian casualties. And so the way that he went after ISIS was to just say, bomb them all. I can see him doing the same thing in Gaza, right? Just saying, like, he wants to claim that he brought an end to the war, and he doesn't care how many bodies he's standing on when he says that.
Yep.
Same thing in Lebanon, obviously. So yeah, these are not great things. These are things that we will have to deal with for decades to come, whatever happens. And I guess the way that you can do something here, like my little glimmer of hope, it's like you can reach out to people all around the world and let them know that, like, even if America's foreign policy is shit, you're not. I have sat in Rojava and I have seen them taking the children to the hospitals, and I've watched the US soldiers sit in their bases and do nothing. And, like, it didn't help, really. I wasn't able to do very much. I couldn't even give blood, but I was able to be there with them, and maybe that meant something. And, like, you can do little things to show your solidarity around the world, because there won't be much of it coming from the government.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Usually on This Podcast Will Kill You, we talk about the diseases, infections, and biological threats that can make us really sick.
But right now, we're doing something a little different.
We're stepping back and looking at what the human body needs to keep going.
When you consider what we know about sleep in humans, there's one rule that comes out. We are predictably unpredictable sleepers.
We're talking about why sleep works the way it does, why our bodies don't follow neat rules, and why modern life makes rest so hard to come by.
The second half of our series takes us to the digestive system with a multi-part series on what happens after we eat. Okay, I just have to say that all of my favorite words apparently are digestive words.
Sphincter, peristalsis, duodenum. It's fascinating, it's funny, and it matters so much more than you think.
Episodes of our new series run from January 20th through February 17th, with new episodes every Tuesday on the Exactly Right Network.
Listen to This Podcast Will Kill You as part of the Exactly Right Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong with a podcast called The Red Weather. In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth. You can now binge all episodes of The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When you feel uncomfortable, what do you put on?
Biggie.
You put on Biggie when you feel uncomfortable?
Because I want to get confident.
This is DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy, a new podcast from me, a DJ and licensed therapist that asks one simple question. Who do you want to be? And what's the song that can take you there? Music changes what you feel, and what you feel changes what you do, right? That moment where a song shifts something inside you, that's where transformation starts. This year, I'm talking to experts across every area of life, like personal finance icon Gene Chatsky, New York Times journalist David Gellis, relationship legend Dan Savage, human connection teacher Mark Groves, and the man who shaped my ear more than anyone, Questlove. They'll bring the strategies, I'll pair them with the right records, and we'll teach you how to use the music to make change stick. This isn't just a podcast. It's unconventional therapy for your entire year. Listen to DJ Hester Prynne's Music is Therapy on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Ever feel like you're being chased by the marriage police? Welcome to Boys and Girls, the podcast where dating isn't dating. Arranged marriage is basically a reality show, except the contestants are strangers and your entire family is judging. You're sipping coffee with one maybe, grabbing dinner with another, and praying your karmic Ken or Barbie appears before your shelf life runs out. Trust me, I've been through this ancient and unshakable tradition. I jumped in hoping to find love the right way, and instead I found chaos, cringe, and comedy. And now I'm looking for healing. Boys and Girls dives into every twist and turn of the arranged marriage carousel. The meet awkward, the near misses, the heartbreak, and let's not forget all the jokes. Listen to Boys and Girls on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What up, y'all? Welcome to It Already Happened Here, because this was the goal of this show, was to tell you that things was probably going to happen here, and then it did. I am not one of the normal hosts, as you can tell. I am your friendly cousin that shows up every once in a while during the holidays. And if your cousins are anything like my cousins, which means we're immediately going to get in trouble because parents are going to blame you since I'm the cousin, because it's not my fault because I'm the guest. Anyway, we want to talk about some stuff that, like, in some senses is a bit absurd to talk about because, like, the American understanding of pan-ethnic terms and demographics are just absurd.
Yes.
Right? It just don't make sense. Like, nobody in the group identifies as what the group is called, but that's still the group, right?
Yep.
I recommend a book called Why Fish Don't Exist. It's a great book. I am here with the brilliant Mia Wong. What's up, Mia?
It's all happening. It's all happening here, and it sucks. But at least I'm getting great intros. This is the best one I've ever gotten.
Best intro. That's what I come for. You know what I'm saying? Like, I come for us to, like, be able to have pancakes for breakfast, you know, because your cousin's here. You know what I'm saying? So you get to have, like, pancakes for breakfast and, you know, stay in your pajamas longer. Like, it's great when your cousins are here. Yeah. Anyway, so let's do this. We want to talk about, well, the thing is, like, I don't know if y'all have admitted, I admitted this on our show, that, like, we kind of had to have an all hands on deck discussion here as to, like, okay, let's get organized. Like, let's figure out what we're going to say as a network and kind of brainstorm things to talk about. Cause I'm pretty sure, like, a lot of us are still like, wait, what the fuck? I'm sorry, what? Like, you know?
Yeah.
And us holding down the DEI section of Cool Zone. You know, we are the diversity, equity, and inclusion over here. Figured, you know, there were some things that were super shocking around some of the data that was coming back from the exit polls as we thought about, like, okay, so who actually voted for who and how much? And so we kind of wanted to talk about the Asian vote, right?
Yep.
Which is, again, from the intro, it's an absurd category to say that.
We're going to get into that because, boy.
Totally. Yeah. The Latino vote, which is also equally as absurd as a category. And yeah, just where some of the sort of marginalized groups, like some of the numbers that were in some ways shocking. I will say, as far as holding down the black man section, I am very proud of us for eventually coming back home, right? And voting in the upper 80% for the black woman, you know, which was encouraging. Now, granted, our number of how many of us voted shrank immensely, you know.
Yeah.
But either way, we just wanted to talk about those things. And I think one caveat for me, I would say, and then I'll turn it over. I think Mia, like, you know, you can take it on from there, is I am in fact a black man. So I think I can speak from a certain level of experience. Obviously not the experience of every human, right? But I can speak from a certain level of experience. Now, as we talk about the Latino vote, I am, in fact, newsflash, not Latino. You know what I'm saying? My wife is from East LA, but obviously proximity is not the same as being a member of.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind as we discuss these things. So let me turn it over to Mia.
Yeah, and you know, this is one of these. You're talking a bit about the sort of category and coherence here, right? And like one of the things about the way this is aggregated is that so Asian Americans as a whole went about 5% to the right in this election, but that doesn't capture what was going on because every part of the demographics were just sort of flying in every direction.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of the actual right-wing pull was very specifically from my people, which is to say Chinese Americans who went right in staggering numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not really surprised by because this has just been the way that sort of specifically Chinese American communities have been shifting for the past, I mean, really like 8-10 years, but particularly intensifying since 2020.
Yeah.
And so if you look at sort of where these things happened, the biggest ones were New York and LA, and you know places like Seattle had some shifts. But I think New York and LA in particular are important for this because a huge part of the reason that this happened was the sort of crime panic stuff.
Yeah.
And the crime panic didn't 100% start with Chinese Americans, but it's one of the earliest sort of incubators of this entire thing. So the sort of trajectory of this is that in 2020, you have this sort of like whole Stop Asian Hate campaign, right? and
yeah,
you have all this race, like sort of like racist, like incitement of violence.
Yeah.
And you get sort of two responses to it, right? There's the kind of like liberal-ish response, which is Stop Asian Hate, but it's kind of vacuous. It doesn't really have any political like content at all. It's kind of vaguely anti-Trump, but like there's not much there. And then there's the right-wing response, and the right-wing response is just, okay, like we're just going to blame black people for this.
Yeah.
And that's like fucking horse shit. It's like, no, it was almost everyone was just getting killed by white people because that's
almost all of them. Yeah.
the way racial violence works in this country, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, this was an area where the left kind of just did nothing. And if you look at the left response, there's some people who did stuff, right? There was, like some sex worker orgs, like Red Canary Song did some great work, but most of the rest of the American left saw this and was like, okay, the thing that matters here and the actual problem with anti-Asian violence is that people are criticizing the Chinese government too much. And that's what's causing this. And so we need to defend the CCP.
Ooh,
and this is just politically, this is fucking radioactive to like 80-90% of like fucking Asian Americans. Because like, there's a sort of combinations of factors, right? You have, on the one hand, you have sort of immigrant communities where most of this shit doesn't work because you're dealing with people who were like, I don't know, we're fucking sterilized by the government because the CCP decided to like do Malthusian fucking population control.
Have no love for the CCP, none whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then this is too reductive even with Cubans, but it's like this isn't something where you could just sort of brush this away with like, oh, all of these people were like reactionaries from Taiwan or something like that. It's like, no, like a lot of these people came here very recently. And there are sort of Tibetan communities. There's people from Xinjiang here.
Yeah.
And all of those people, like all of the sort of pro-CCP shit is radioactive. And that's what was coming out of the American left. And the same thing with like sort of with the Hong Kong movement, right? Where there was like, there was this really broad consensus among sort of American social democracy, you're sort of like people who were like marginally to the left of Bernie, right? That stuff was all CIA stuff and it was bad and that you should support the CCP. I mean, there are some tenant organizers who do good work we've had on the show, right? Like there are people trying to organize these communities, but like the mainstream left was just like, fuck it, we don't care. We don't give a shit about you. Like the important thing about you being killed is that we can defend this fucking state that we like.
Yeah.
And so what happened to the Stop Asian Hate thing is that it got folded into the crime panic because the product of this was both the sort of right-wing, we're going to give you anti-black racism as your like, this is going to be your solution, quote unquote, to this.
Yeah.
And the sort of Stop Asian Hate, like mainstream sort of liberal thing, both just fed directly into carceralism.
Yeah.
And, so you started, like, it turned into this rallying cry for, like, hate crime bills and then, like, increasing police presences. And, like, the fucking cops were, like, all over the place where this shit was happening and, didn't do anything because they're cops, right? Like,
facts.
All of this fed into, it went sort of seamlessly into the crime panic where you could just feed all of these people the sort of memory of the fear and the anger over, like, Asian people getting killed, and you could just lump that in with crime. And then these communities also, and when I say these communities, it's kind of important here to do like class breakdowns here too, because a big part of what's happening here is an alignment that I think, like, if the Republicans could be like 15% less racist or figure out how to channel the racism against one target at a time, a lot of these people would have fucking fled right in the first place because...
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like rich people, professionals, and like small business owners. And it's like, well, yeah, of course those people are like unbelievably sort of turbo hardline reactionaries. It's like, yeah, those are the guys who are like shooting at people from the rooftops in fucking LA in 92. Like,
yeah,
like these same people in China, like in Taiwan, in Hong Kong. These are people that if you were on the left, you would just be fighting every day. But they kind of have been lumped into the Democratic Party because of the just unbelievable racism from the Republicans. And now the sort of crime panic stuff has finally given them this thing where the Republican deal is basically like, okay, if you're okay with sort of being anti-black with us, if you're okay with massive expansions of police presence, you're okay with us running on that, right? And also on anti-homeless politics. That's been a huge, extremely effective thing, particularly among business owners. I mean, I remember, God, I think I've told the story on air, but back when I was in Chicago, there was this library in Chinatown that I used to like. It was next to a bunch of shops, and so you could get bakery food, and you could go sit at these benches. And I came back to them in 2020, and the benches literally had a thing drilled into the table threatening to arrest you if you sat at them for too long.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And this was like 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
So, the sort of anti-homelessness stuff had started really, really early there, and it's just hideous. And, these places have swung to the right. They're electing Republicans, and they're doing it because this kind of like Asian American petit bourgeois, like small business class, and some of the sort of richer tech people, et cetera, are swinging really, really hard to the right.
Yeah, man, that actually connected so many dots for me. Like, first of all, like even to like the anti-homeless thing, like, you start seeing that weird middle of the bench arm rail.
Yep.
Like, well, it's like, that's so you won't lay on it. That's why you did this. But like, I hope what I'm about to say is not a trope. You know what I'm saying? It's because of like the proximity that I've had with the Asian community, in the sense that my stepmom's Filipino. All the DJs I've all worked with, all these just hip hop at some point in the 90s, the Filipinos took over. You know what I'm saying? So like, that's been a lot of ways our community. But I found that, the like proper Asian and the jungle Asian thing, where it's like, depending on your relationship with the United States, is almost even if you identify as Asian. Because you sit down 10 Filipinos, like half of them gonna say they Pacific Islander.
Yep.
The other half gonna say they Asian. The other half gonna say they Asian Pacific Islander. And then my lord, Cambodia right next to them, who are all in Long Beach and they're Crips. You know what I'm saying? So like that sort of world, like they were with us, as far as like they were just a part of our community. Whereas the sort of northern kind of proper Asian world, like, it's cities is like Alhambra, Monterey Park. This is very California stuff, but they stuck to themselves.
Yeah.
And they saw a lot of the American thing as like, this is pragmatic. Like, we're here to win. Like, so when you started having the Asian hate thing, like it's almost like, now that you say it, it's like, we just tied that community up into a bow and then handed them to the right.
Yeah.
Because this all happened at the same time as like the anti-affirmative action.
Yep. Although I do want to say on the anti-affirmative action stuff, because I think people mischaracterize what's going on with that. Asian Americans as a whole and as subgroups support affirmative action.
Yes.
Very consistently. Every time they're polled, there's like 60% support for it, right?
Yeah.
But there's like 40% of these fucking dipshits who are like,
yes,
I don't know. I'm like my sort of like classic Asian response to this is like, I fucking did it. I was a terrible student. I got into the University of Chicago. Like, you dipshits need to fucking study harder. Like, you're not the reason you're not getting into these universities isn't because like black people are being allowed in. It's because you suck. Like, fucking skill issue. What the fuck is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
But like there was this like class. Yeah. This sort of class dynamic.
That's what I was going to get to, is this class distinction, in the sense that from a black perspective, it was like, yo, we rallied for y'all over the like stop Asian hate thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then to come back around and see this again from a class perspective, because kind of the same thing happened in a lot of ways in the black community, because the reasoning, as you say that's why I say it all makes sense. The reasoning is the same. Like, the system is not for me, so I'm just going to get mine. Damn the community.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just going to go get mine, And so in the black community, for those that swung right, it was just like in some senses, they're like, well, I know y'all are fucking racist. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I'd like, as far as like the rights, like, I know you are. With the left, it was more like, you're just gaslighting me.
Yeah.
So, well, if you're just going to gaslight me and I already know that you hate me, well, fuck it, I'm just going to get mine.
Yep.
And that becomes the thing. But as a community, like you said, in the same way, as far as like the beef between like the historical LA riots, like Chinese and Korean communities, while their parents were on the roofs of their shops shooting at us, they kids was breaking into they was with us. Like, he was breaking into the same stores we was breaking into, so that class distinction was something that made us kind of be like, bro, like, don't you understand? You'll never be one of them. They'll never really love you, And I feel like even that sort of like appeal would lurch this group even further to be like, don't tell me who you are. Don't tell me what they're giving me what I need. So yeah, like, I never thought about tying all that together and it being like a Chinese lurching. Wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah, and okay, you know what else sells products that are from China? It's these products and services. Support the podcast.
We sell products from China.
And we're back. So I think that there's one more thing I want to make sure I get to about the Chinese American stuff before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things you kind of brought up earlier was the insularity.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of what's going on here too is that there's a lot of Chinese immigrants and people who, you get communities that are speaking, like they're speaking like Cantonese or Mandarin. And in a lot of cases, it's like you'll get these very, very small, tight-knit communities with people who are speaking like a provincial dialect that's like semi-incomprehensible to other people, right? Because it's like effectively its own language. And one of the problems here, and this is one of the places where the left shit the bed, like wasn't doing good organizing, right? And the consequence of this is that in a lot of the things that were getting put out in these spaces, the media is all unbelievably right-wing.
Yeah.
Right? There's Miles Guo, who, whenever, like 12 years from now, when I finish the Lab Leak episode, he's going to be a big part of this. He was this Chinese billionaire who defected to the U.S., then came here and ran 1 trillion scams and is currently going to prison for like, I'm pretty sure he was the guy whose boat Steve Bannon was on when Steve Bannon got arrested by the post office cops.
Let's go.
So
just varsity level bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like he was issuing passports from like a fake government in exile that he set up. He's running every scam in the entire world. But he's also, he's also one of the people who started the whole Lab Leak thing. And he was flooding the like all sort of Chinese language media with this hardline right wing sort of pro-Republican hardline anti-China stuff. And then you have a very similar thing coming from the Falun Gong, who are everywhere in every Chinatown. There's Falun Gong guys everywhere. They're posters. They're the people. So they're a cult. They run Shenyu. They run a newspaper called the Epoch Times, which is just a pure fascist propaganda outlet. And those things kind of just like devoured the entire Chinese language media ecosystem. And it wasn't good before because like there were also a bunch of other weird right-wing groups. Like part of the problem here too is it's possible for in sort of Asian American community for you to have two people who by American standards have identical politics, right? They're identically right-wing on things like racial politics, on their like anti-crime stuff, who are incredibly sexist and like homophobic, but they absolutely fucking hate each other because one of them is a pro-CCP Chinese nationalist and one of them's an anti-CCP Chinese nationalist.
Wow. Yeah.
But this kind of like, what's been able to kind of weld that shit together is this sort of like Republican anti-black tough on crime campaign combined with all of this sort of media sphere stuff.
Wow. Yeah. It's Shades Rebellion all over again. Like just at least you're not them.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the simplicity of that right-wing message of just like, here's all your problems are those fools, and I'll just get rid of them.
Yeah, and we can solve this with more cops and Donald Trump.
We just solve it with more, yeah, man. So for my end, I looked at the Black and Latino vote. I can run through the Black one pretty quick because it wasn't as interesting of a story, and also because we did an episode with Garrison Hayes from Mother Jones on like Black conservatives and Trump voters. And I think ultimately it comes down to the fact of like the Franz Ferdinand thought of like, okay, what is liberation? Like, what is freedom? And is it, my ability to flourish without any hindrances, or is it a collective ending of suffering? You know what I'm saying? So like, in other words, it's like, this plantation would be better if I ran the big house rather than being like, burn the fucking big house down because there shouldn't be slavery. You know what I'm saying? So like that sort of approach to, again, the reality of, well, I know the system's not for me. In a lot of ways, that's what's interesting about the understanding of it. So when you would look at somebody like a Black person, like, why would you vote for this racist man? And it's like, well, the same reason I would vote for every other racist man. You know what I'm saying? Like, find me one that ain't. So like that attitude is already there. So, obviously all of us would push back and say that like, well, you choosing yourself is also a vote against yourself and is destroying your community. Clearly, it's never worked. At some point, which I'm sure y'all can relate to, it's like, I feel two ways when I see like Black people, specifically Black men, sit at this table, because I'm like, I can imagine the first joke that you kind of let slide. That was like, it's kind of weird, but I don't know. It's no big deal. I'll get over it. Maybe they didn't mean it, you know? And then that joke gets more and more intense. And then all of a sudden you sitting in a room and they cracking jokes about Haitians eating pets and that Puerto Rico's a trap. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it didn't start there. It started with you accepting and just being like all lighting up. And at some point, somebody said something to you and you made a face and they went, dude, it's a joke, man. It's a joke. Come on, bro. You know me, right? You've had that, you know what I'm saying? And I know that happened a year ago, and now look at you, you know? So like, eventually, the point I'm making is like, at some point, you are going to have to lay down all of your identifying factors to be able to stay at this table. And I hope that 30-year fixed mortgage was worth it.
Yep.
You know? So the Black story is like, what is going to get us the financial, or get me specifically, the financial freedom that the Democrats kept promising, but never gave to us. But that's, like I said, that's a much less interesting story in my opinion than the Latino vote, which we could talk about after this break. Woo. All right, so we're back. Now, 64%, right, of air quotes Latinos voted right wing this year. Now, I feel like I know this needs a lot of unpacking, because first of all, what the hell is a Latino?
Yeah.
Right, is the first question that you have to ask. And essentially, I think I've come to the fact that what America means by that is you were colonized by Spain. So in some way, you kind of speak somewhat Spanish, unless it's Brazil, in which case you were colonized by the Portuguese, right? So it's like, you don't even know what you mean. Like, y'all don't even know what you mean.
It's staggering that like one of our primary demographic categories was invented by a coalition of like Maoists and like Vietnamese Marxist-Leninists that fell apart immediately the moment that China invaded Vietnam, and that's only our second most incoherent democratic category. Like, it's
completely incoherent, right? So
staggering.
you have my wife, my life partner, who is born in LA, but she is a first gen. She grew up in southern Mexico. She is first gen Mexican, but she's like, I identify as indigenous, and it's true. She is like, even when we did the DNA test, if you believe in that stuff, she's like, but you can just look at her, and I'm like, you're Incan, like, you know what I'm saying? You're looking at her, and she's like, yeah, you're right. Like, we are overwhelmingly, vast majority of her DNA is indigenous. So for her, if you check a demographic box, it's like, are you Hispanic? She's like, why would I identify with the colonizer? So no, I'm not Hispanic. Like, they're the colonizer.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas you ask a Puerto Rican or a Cuban or Dominican, they say Hispanic, but they just mean it differently. One, because the island was called Hispaniola. You know what I'm saying? So like, they just mean something totally different.
Yeah.
And Dominicans is black as hell. You know what I'm saying? And then what about a Cuban? The way that they relate to America is also incredibly different, especially because of, like, you know, I'm pretty sure y'all room knows is if you could touch dry ground, right?
Yeah.
And that really just had to do with the fact that we just ain't fuck with Castro. So the way that they relate to even immigration is completely different, because if you could make it to the soil, if you could make it to Florida, you're a citizen. So they just didn't go through the same things that people from Central and South America went through to be able to become a citizen. And on top of all that, California, Arizona, and Texas is Mexico. So some of them ain't immigrants. They was here. Like, the border moved. We didn't cross the border crossed us. So you put all that together, mixed with a group of people who might be 9th generation Mexican, that people that don't speak Spanish, the no sabos, as you call it, like, won't even speak Spanish. You know what I'm saying? That, like, you lump all these people who speak so many different languages and have so many different understandings of who they are, and you just call them Latino, and then you get this number. But if you're willing to accept the absurdity of it, then we could talk about the actual, like, what actually happened here. And what you find are two things that seem so reductive, but as you look at the exit polls and even like interviews that I personally conducted, if you set aside the person that has been just cooked by just the right wing information, like set that person aside, that is just your brain's been cooked. Like you set that aside and you look at this, there are two very reductive things that just continue to just be true. One is Latin America is very religious.
Yep.
It's still Catholic, and machismo is a big part of their culture. And it seems so reductive, but it's what happened. You know, this is still a very patriarchal culture. And, you know, as anecdotal and as running joke as it is, that like, if you have a Latina daughter and she's bringing, because again, they're very traditional. That's why I'm saying I'm using cisgender things. It's like you bring a boy over, your grandma, all your tias are watching you make him a plate. You have to go over there and make him a plate and sit it in front of him, or you going to be judged. This is just the culture, you know? So it's no surprise that that is not going to play into how you vote, right? And then secondly, the religious thing, in the sense that like, this actually like really blew my mind. In a couple interviews I had, I wanted to talk to specifically Latina women, because I was like, it just seemed as though there was just a triple layer of shit you'd have to swallow to be able to go this route, right? And my main question was like, what was the non-negotiable? And was there a line that Trump and by extension, the Republican Party could cross? Like, where's the line? What is the too far line, right? And they landed on a few things. It was crazy. Like after talking to 3 different women, they all kind of landed on the same things. It was abortion.
Yep.
Right. They were like, at the end of the day, this is untenable. And to which I pushed back, where I was like, well, Trump's not anti-abortion. And what they all said was like, we could deal with the 16-week. Like I could deal with the 16-week thing, obviously, because again, they are women and they're not completely pilled. They're like, we understand that there are situations that happen, right, that just are untenable. And then the next thing that they said was like, which was the part that like really just kept putting my brain in a pretzel, was we are really big on anti-sex trafficking. And the idea for us on this, knowing that like, okay, so the right wing stole that. Like they don't believe it. They stole that concept and they wrapped everything around it, right? But one of them mentioned how she couldn't vote for Hillary because she heard rumors about child stuff. And she's referring to Pizzagate, you know?
Yeah. This is huge shit.
Of which I was able to push back to be like, well, that was, you know, it was debunked. Like, and she was like, I just don't like how they move. I don't trust Bill and how he behaved in the Oval Office. And it's like, you're looking around like, are you?
They were both on Epstein's plane. Like, what?
I'm like, and she even said, she was like, but the Epstein thing. And I'm like, well, they're all, I don't understand I don't understand how you don't see this connection.
Yeah.
Right. And to which they both said, oh no, we see it. You're, again, find me someone that's not nasty is their answer. Find me someone that's not corrupt. Find me someone that's not nasty. At least he's going to save the babies, was the thing. And then the next question I had about them was the anti-immigration thing, the borders, right? And we're talking to people who are 1 and 2, some of them 3 generations removed. And one of them gave me an example of a family member's in-law who got deported, 50 years old, got deported from something they did when they were 19. He's like, it's tough. Like, this was a hardworking man who's done his best, who you know, has done everything they could, and it's got to swallow. So I asked her, like, yo, do you think that that's unfair? She said, no. She was like, our family waited in line. Our family did everything they needed to do. We fought. We came to this, again, same thing. We came to this country because we believed in the dream and we fought for it, you know, and we did it right. you know, obviously like with the Mexican, like sort of like work ethic of like, no excuses, just work. We can't stand for no cheaters. We don't believe in stuff like that. You have to work for yours, right? And we come here, there's no cuts in front of the lines. There's no shortcuts. You do the work, right? And if you cheat, you go to the back of the line. That's just what it is. So she's like, he's talking about criminals. I'm not a criminal. He's talking about criminals.
Yeah.
You know, that's not me. I'm a hardworking citizen, you know? So that sort of mindset. And then she said, at the end of the day, we came for the dream. I'm here to work, you know? And if I put in the work, if my family puts in the work, we succeed. That's what this country's for. You're fucking it up for all of us. You cheating the system is fucking it up for all of us. And so that sort of like, I can swallow the racist shit because I don't give a fuck about you anyway. Because I already know you don't give a fuck about me. I'm just here to get mine. So for them, at least according to the way they're explaining it, is like the prejudice line is not a line they worried about. That's something I've already accepted, you know? But what is a line is, oddly enough, treatment of women and the treatment of children and the ability to flourish. And then lastly, for the men, it's what we know, like just the manosphere has cooked our kids. It just cooked them, you know? And it dovetailed so well into the Latino machismo. And even on the black shit, like I knew we were in trouble when the hood niggas was running around here saying they was finna vote for Trump because they understand it. It's like, you either get on or get out. Like, I'm here, I'm gonna get with you either for me or against me. This is what we doing, you know what I'm saying, right? I'm gonna let you be, you know, as derogatory as this is, like, I'm gonna let you be a man, you go fight what you gonna fight, and the Democrats are gonna turn your sons into daughters. I don't, that, like, that's the thought, you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, well, fuck it, let's just get ours, you know what I'm saying? That simplicity of a message, it just resonated. While you have, which didn't bother me, but you have somebody like Obama coming in there like somebody's uncle, basically like, you young niggas need to pull up your pants, stop acting like thugs, and get in line. You know what I'm saying? It's like, all right, okay, you know, to me, that don't bother me because I'm like, well, yeah, you're somebody's uncle. Like, you are that. Oh, of course, that's how you talk, you know? But the street dudes is like, look, man, I don't need this Harvard grad, like, pretty ass, like, rich nigga to tell me what it's like. You wasn't out here. You wasn't in the trenches. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're a millionaire. I don't like you. You barely want to, because you can hoop. Oh, so you like basketball. You one of us. You know what I'm saying? So I just think that like, you've already got yours. So let me get mine is like, at the end of the day, was so appealing to this particular demographic. And it just made sense. So that's why they voted that way.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of like angles of this too that connect with what was going on with Asian Americans. So partially also the religion angle is a thing that isn't talked about enough, and also isn't talked about enough with Asian Americans, like particularly Chinese Americans. There's a whole bunch of how do I explain this in a way that, you know, the sort of like zeal of a convert shit, where like the first generation converts are the most nuts. Yeah, so that's like a huge portion of like Chinese Christians are these like first generation evangelical converts. And so you get these just like really terrifying, like ferociously right wing stuff that just kind of eats everything around it. And I think the second part is, I think there's an interesting distinction here too, because I think there's like a kind of differing parts of the storyness of the kind of like we came here to work thing, because that was the Asian American thing from maybe 20 years ago. And the last 10 years, and especially post 2020, has been people realizing that it's not real. And that, you know, you work. And this is actually also, funny enough, exact same thing happening in China with sort of different political results, because it's you know, you're not dealing with like the same kind of sort of immigrant culture stuff. But the Chinese American version of this was like, okay, we need to figure out who to blame for this. And they were like, well, yeah, okay, it's because of like all of this crime shit, and because like people aren't going to prison for 1 million years, and like I see a black person and there's like a homeless person who I have to like walk past every day. This is the reason why like our fucking dream died. And that was a really sort of appealing message to people. And it's the same kind of thing with the people who went for the affirmative action stuff, where it was like the people who, are like, in all seriousness, like we're running into kind of like, oh no, there actually is a sort of wall that you hit.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't matter how hard you work. Like there's only so many spots at university. There's only so many, there's only so far you can go. And hitting that wall drove a bunch of people right.
You make a good point, and I imagine the same sort of reaction to that within the Chinese community is going to be the same with ours, where it's like, okay, you gonna learn that you are not welcome to that table. They will always choose themselves. And, you could dress yourself up, and just to the degree for which you can alter all identifying factors. For us, it's like to the degree for which you can remove your blackness is to the degree for which you're welcomed in this table. But at some point, you can't take it off.
Yeah.
It don't rub off. Dress your kids up. That was like for us with respectability politics, like teach your kids to speak proper English and dress them up and don't let them wear hoodies. Okay, good luck. Like Jay-Z's seminal work. Look, OJ said, I'm not black, I'm OJ. Okay. Like, and it's just, they will never accept you. The world you're trying to get into will never accept you. And this step towards trying to be accepted by this world is working against you and everyone else behind you,
Yep.
But this is America. You can vote however you want to vote.
Well, and I think 2020, like for us, was that moment, right? Where like, everyone kind of got knocked out of the, whichever way you sort of fragmented politically, is like that's when you got knocked out of the sort of Obama multiracial dream.
Yeah.
Was when you realized that like all of this fucking progress you made isn't going to stop people from killing you in the street.
Yes.
And the reaction to that was like, and I saw this on the left where like a bunch of people basically splintered off and became like hardline Chinese nationalists because they were afraid. And they were like, okay, well, here's this thing that we have, this like strong state that will protect us and we just have to fight for it here. It's like, well, that didn't work. Right. No. And then you have a lot of other people who started to recognize that this wasn't going to happen, right? That like the thing that they had bought into was a lie, but the part of it that they believed, they were just like, well, okay, if we can just like fucking get the black people out of here and like we can get the cops in, we can go back to living in our fucking fantasy world.
Yeah.
And that's been just the sort of dominant response to it. And I don't know, it's bleak, but it's not something that can't be overcome, but it's going to require organizing, and it's going to require the left to not be about fucking making white people feel more anti-imperialist, which has been what fucking politics towards Asian Americans has been. And until that shit gets jettisoned, like you're going to keep seeing this shit accelerate.
Yeah. Man, has there been any, I don't know if the right term is like vision casting among this community? Because like, I say that to say, albeit a very small fraction of voices, but among some of the black thinkers is like a serious consideration of pursuing, like creating a third party of just like, but let's like take it serious this time. Like for real.
Yeah.
Like there's, it's like I said, it's very small. And like, obviously like my grandchildren will probably be the ones to see any sort of beginnings of that actually taking root. But it's still like, people are, there's some of the things that are being talked about right now. Like we should really consider it. Is there anything like that going on?
No, like, and this is also part of the problem is that like the Asian American intellectual class is like one of the most bankrupt classes in the entire country. There's nothing. It's a wasteland out there. Like it's, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like it's so bad. It's like all of the art and the media, the culture and the sort of analysis is all, I've talked about on this show a decent amount, but it's all wrapped up in this sort of like, oh, you too can like integrate and become a small business owner. And those people, the people who believe that and the people who did that don't actually have any interesting ideas.
Yeah.
They have the incredibly narrow ideas of their class, and the incredibly narrow ideas of their class are completely useless for the sort of task we have ahead of us.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of working for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's working for them. It's
working for
just,
them.
It isn't working for anyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and like, oh my God, like, I don't know, like the people who are supposed to be like Wesley Yang, who is supposed to be like the great sort of like new Asian intellectual, is now this just completely cooked right-winger, like some of the people have been like turning on, like some of the big podcasters have been like turning on trans people, and I'm just like, well, fuck all you guys, like eat shit.
Basically, yeah.
So yeah, the situation's bad. It's also the fragmentation is so powerful because you're dealing with so many kinds of like linguistic lions and lions between people who've been here for 10 generations and people who just like walked off the boat yesterday. There's and so the fragmentation I think helps prevent a more coherent sphere, but like it's bleak out there.
Yeah, man.
it's the prognosis.
Yeah. Obviously like the Black queer community is obviously incredibly vibrant and strong and organized, and at least from the part of the intersection that I'm a part of, the voice coming out of that space of like a lot of times of like very much prophetic and like, very much like truth telling that you hear from, again, like, Black queer community is like, from our perspective, they continue to be like 5 steps ahead of us.
Yeah.
Of like where we need to go as a people.
Yeah. This was like the sex worker orgs for us, but then because this is another thing where the left just kind of shit the bed, right? Like this is the thing with Bernie, where Bernie voted for Sesta Fosta, right? And there's never been a reckoning about that at all.
Yeah.
And so, like the stuff that could have come out of that just kind of never did. And we never got the kind of integration, the kind of politics that we could have had if people had been like 5%. Well, not 5%. It would require them to move their positions a bit. But like if people had actually cared about sex workers, we wouldn't be here right now. But
a totally different story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was informative. This has been, I don't know. How do we describe what this has been?
Well,
Mia,
I can close with this, right? This situation isn't hopeless.
Yeah.
Right. There's been a lot of good tenant organizing going on. Like there's a lot of kinds of stuff that can and do work. It's nose to the grindstone time, right?
Yeah.
It is time to lock in. It's time to organize. And these communities can be organized.
Yeah.
We just haven't yet. And,
Yeah, to your point, like, for me, like, all information is helpful. Like if somebody's lying to you, like, it's good information to know that this person thinks that that's something worth lying about. Like, you just told me something about yourself, that the fact that you think that that's worth lying about. So I say all that to say this understanding, a better understanding of like, it's hard to reason with somebody when they're hungry, so just a better understanding of what do these communities actually prioritize? What do they actually value? And obviously, like, the Dems and unfortunately even the left was just swinging a miss, guys. Like, this type of thing, like you said, is not hopeless. It's like, now there's an understanding of like, okay, so you value the hustle. All right, well, let me tell you in the ways for which the choice you just made is working against your hustle, or now here are ways for which you can, like you said, nose to the grind and accomplish these goals in a way that's not so detrimental to the people around you. Yeah, I'm with it. Like, I'm not hopeless either. I think that we just need to think about our word choice and what hills we're willing to die on, and be like, this is what we meant when we said this.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can now find sources for It Could Happen Here listed directly in episode descriptions. Thanks for listening.
Then she says, have you seen a photo of my son? And I'm like, who is this person?
Welcome to the Boys and Girls Podcast. Arranged marriage is basically a reality show, and you're auditioning for your soulmate. And who's judging? Only your entire family. I sacrificed myself to this ancient tradition, hoping to find love the right way. And instead, I found chaos, comedy, and a lot of cringe. Listen to Boys and Girls on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
14 years in prison for killing a young woman. A 15-year sentence for a crash that caused 3 deaths. 12 and a half years for killing a child and critically injuring her mother. All true stories, all caused by marijuana-impaired drivers. No matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So, if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hey everyone, it's Emily Simpson and Shane Simpson from the Legally Brunette podcast.
Each week, we're bringing you true crime through a legal lens.
Whether you want all the facts on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, or you still need to wrap your head around the Diddy verdict, we're breaking it all down step by step.
And we're not just lawyers, we're also husband and wife. It makes for some pretty entertaining episodes.
Listen to Legally Brunette on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl. He thought up Willy Wonka and the BFG. But did you know he was a spy? In the new podcast, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, I'll tell you that story and much, much more.
What?
You probably won't believe it either.
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Saturday, May 2nd, country's biggest stars will be in Austin, Texas at our 2026 iHeart Country Festival presented by Capital One. Tickets are on sale now. Get yours before they sell out at Ticketmaster.com. That's Ticketmaster.com.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.